The story begins at the prestigious Royal Lux Martial Arts and Magic Academy, where a fierce duel occurs. Frey Garnet, a high school teacher at the academy, watches silently from the sidelines. Lily, one of his most talented students, battles unyielding determination in the courtyard center. When the fight ends, Lily again stands victorious, her opponent defeated. The students around her whisper in awe, amazed by her skill. Frey feels a surge of pride watching her succeed. "She did it again," one student exclaimed, their voice brimming with disbelief and admiration. Frey couldn't help but smile, pride swelling in his chest. He always knew Lily had what it took to shine. Lily called out to her sensei, her tone a mix of curiosity and eagerness, asking how her performance had been. Frey's expression softened as he told Lily. He told her she had been brilliant and that he was proud of her. She smiled warmly and thanked him, expressing that it was all thanks to him. She added that his teaching was incredible and, in her opinion, he was the best teacher in the country. The students mobbed the teacher with quiet hostility, while Lily watched, resigned. It seemed inevitable no one noticed the sensei, overshadowed by the absence of aristocratic status. Frey chuckles, shaking his head. He remarked that it was simply how things were, noting that he was just a commoner with no connections beyond the academy. Frey wished he could offer more than lessons in swordsmanship and magic, but Lily's demeanor made it clear she sought nothing else. Frey hesitated for a moment before reaching out to place his hand on Lily's head. She looked away, flustered, as if unsure of how to respond. Frey then withdrew his hand, expressing his discomfort with the thought of his students being overly familiar with him, emphasizing the importance of maintaining boundaries. Frey reflected on his earlier words to Lily, realizing with a pang of regret that his tone had been unnecessarily condescending. With Lily's birthday coming up, Frey contemplated choosing a gift for her. The Royal Lux Martial Arts and Magic Academy, a prestigious institution reserved for the nobility, prided itself on its elite standards. Yet, despite this exclusivity, Frey, a commoner, secured a position as a teacher. This unexpected appointment did not sit well with Eris. Eris sneered, his expression dripping with smug satisfaction, as he declared that the rumors were true. Frey had been expelled from the academy and hinted that he knew the reason behind it. The girl beside Eris teased Frey with mock concern, feigning fear as she playfully accused him of something unexpected. The girl continued her teasing, escalating her remarks by referencing reports of numerous incidents involving other girls, all of which she attributed to their inadequate training. Her pointed comments were directed at Frey, adding to the tension. Eris reacted dramatically, clutching his head in exaggerated disgust as if he were deeply disturbed by the situation. He referred to the presence of something horrible beast within the prestigious academy. Eris spoke with a hint of restraint, adding that he was willing to hear an explanation out of respect for their years of friendship. However, Frey remained silent, turning to walk away without a word. Eris shouted after him, demanding he stop, declaring that Frey was being interrogated and had no right to leave on his own. Eris's grin twisted with malice as he confronted Frey, mocking him with sharp and cruel words, clearly trying to provoke a reaction. Eris, with a teasing grin and playful tone, urged Frey to speak, his eyes gleaming with mischief. Frey, however, stayed calm. Instead of reacting to the taunts, he laughed. Eris scowled, his expression twisting with disbelief as he questioned whether Frey had lost his mind, struggling to understand if he had truly gone completely crazy. Frey smirked, his expression filled with amusement, as he remarked with biting sarcasm that he had always known Eris didn't like him, but never expected him to orchestrate such a charade. Eris feigned concern, his tone heavy with mockery as he pretended to be relieved. He claimed he had been worried about everything that had been happening, but now felt so much better, his words laced with sarcasm. Frey shouted back, calling it a lame excuse. His expression quickly twisted into fury as he shouted his intent to finish Frey off. Without hesitation, he lunged forward, raising his hand in a menacing gesture as he launched an attack toward Frey. In Eris's mind, he was certain that if Frey defended himself, he would end up in jail. There was nothing he could do, even if it was just self-defense. But Frey moved swiftly, dodging the attack with ease. Eris caught off guard, stumbled and crashed into the wall, stunned and humiliated. The guards rushed over, and one of them asked if Eris was okay. Frey brushed off the tension, his tone sharp as he told Eris to learn some self-control. He then asked if he could go home now. Fuming, Eris yelled at the guards to catch Frey. One of the guards shook his head and replied that it wasn't possible. As Frey was leaving the academy, a familiar voice called, "Frey-sensei." He turned and saw Lily running toward him, her expression filled with concern. Lily, her voice trembling, asked Frey why he was leaving the academy. Frey sighed, his gaze distant as he explained that his departure was because his training methods were considered inappropriate for the female students. Lily shook her head vigorously, insisting that it wasn't true. She argued that Frey would never do something like that, pointing out that the only time he ever touched anyone was when he was helping the girls with their injuries. She emphasized that he had never laid a finger on her or anyone else inappropriately. She appeared ready to protest, but Frey stopped her calmly yet firmly, advising her that speaking up would only make things worse for her. She looked at him with a mix of desperation and gratitude, her voice shaky as she said she'd be lost without him, that he had shaped half of who she was. The tears flowed freely as she broke down in front of him. At the sound of her distress, Frey's expression softened, his voice gentle as he called her name. She paused, wiped her tears, and met his gaze. Frey continued, asking if she remembered everything he had taught her over the years, questioning whether the lessons had truly become a part of her. Without hesitation, Lily answered confidently that she had retained all of it. A warm smile spread across Frey's face as he reassured her that she would be fine, urging her to focus on her improvement. He emphasized that he wanted this for her rather than protesting. Frey reached into his bag pocket and pulled out a small, flower-shaped hair clip, offering it to her with a gentle smile. He asked if she would accept it. Lily's eyes brightened as she took the clip, her voice filled with gratitude as she thanked him, saying she loved it. Frey remarked that he was glad she liked his birthday present. Lily grinned playfully, teasing that when she grew up, she would make him her butler and have him serve her tea. After a moment, she glanced at the time and, with a hint of regret, remarked that it was almost curfew. As they parted ways, Frey said, "Goodbye, Lily." As Frey walked away, a weight settled on his mind. He wondered what he would live for now that he had left the academy. Teaching had been his calling, and the thought of giving it up left him unsettled. With his teaching vocation discarded, the path ahead seemed uncertain, and he couldn't help but feel lost. Meanwhile, the maid hurried toward the dining room in a grand mansion where the 5 devil daughters resided. Inside, the sisters were gathered around the table, their voices a mix of disinterest and curiosity. The topic was their father's decision to hire another teacher, sparking a brief discussion among them. It was the same as always, and the sisters' disinterest was palpable. One of them, arms crossed, said she no longer cared about the situation. Another dismissed the idea altogether, stating she didn't need a teacher. The third, with a tone full of indifference, agreed, remarking that none of them did. As their chatter continued, the maid arrived, informing them that she was going to pick up their new teacher, and they will soon meet their teacher. The sisters exchanged glances, their reactions varying from boredom to a faint hint of intrigue. After curtsying, the maid exited, leaving the 5 devil daughters to quietly ponder what kind of person their father had chosen this time. After the incident, the public had turned against Frey. While out shopping, he couldn't escape the whispers and stares, with people muttering about how disgraceful he was. Despite his efforts to explain that the accusations were false, no one seemed willing to believe him. As Frey walked back home, his thoughts were weighed down by frustration and helplessness. It wasn't until he felt the strain of his shopping bags that he realized he had bought far more than he could easily carry. Reaching his house, he paused at the mailbox and was surprised to find a letter waiting for him. It was unusual for him to receive mail, and the sight of the envelope left him momentarily shocked. Frey wandered into the forest at night when a sudden shout broke the silence, calling out for a teacher. A drunken man stumbled forward, mocking Frey and accusing him of heading to a nighttime gathering. With a sneer, he called him a disgrace. The drunk man hurled a bottle of ale toward Sensei, cursing in anger. In response, Sensei calmly used his magic, whispering a command to the wind. The bottle reversed its course, flying back toward the drunk man. The drunk man stood in confusion, muttering about the floor and magic as the ground beneath him began to swirl, wrapping around his legs and holding him in place. Struggling, he shouted in frustration, demanding to be released. Meanwhile, Frey walked away without concern, casually stating that he would release him when the sun rose before bidding him farewell. Frey stopped walking and turned slightly, acknowledging the drunk man's impressive aim despite his intoxication. He remarked that such talent should be put to better use. The drunk man, still restrained and fuming, shouted back, mocking Frey and questioning if he still considered himself a teacher. Frey silently acknowledged the inevitable no matter what he did from that moment on. No one would take him seriously. As he stared at the letter in his hands, his thoughts shifted to the sender, lingering on the weight of its message. The letter stated an offer for a teaching position, providing a specific time and location along with a map. As Frey read it, he reflected on the irony of receiving such an offer despite his bad reputation. The entire situation felt unusual to him. Following the map's directions, he found himself led to a small wooden house deep within the forest. Frey hesitated, questioning whether this was another trap like the one Arius had set for him. Uncertainty crept in as he wondered if he was walking into danger. Despite his doubts, he stepped into the wooden house, acknowledging to himself that he was no longer a decent person. He wasn't sure why he had come, perhaps simply out of curiosity. Frey stepped inside the wooden house, only to find it empty. He glanced around and concluded that the offer must have been a joke. Just as the thought settled, a sound came from behind him. Turning, he found a maid standing there, calmly stating that she had been waiting for him. Frey looked at the maid, confused, and wondered when she had entered, suspecting she had come from behind him. In response, she calmly stated that she had been there from the beginning and thanked him for coming. Puzzled, Frey tried to make sense of the situation. The maid explained that she had been sent by her master, introducing herself as Rose. She mentioned she would provide more details about the mansion. Frey, however, paused and objected, feeling unsure, and said he didn't accept the job yet. He then inquired about the identity of her master and the location of the work. Rose responded, indicating that if Frey wanted more details, they would need to go to the mansion, then clarified that if he was truly willing to proceed, he would need to cross through the door. She made it clear that if he chose not to, he was free to leave the way he came. Frey moved toward the door, preparing to exit. He couldn't help but voice his concerns, feeling the situation was far too dangerous. The idea of the maid traveling all the way there with a job offer seemed suspicious to him. He felt no obligation to follow her and questioned the need to proceed any further. Frey stood there, contemplating the reason he had come. It was clear to him that it was connected to the students, but that was exactly what worried him. After a moment of hesitation, he turned to Rose and made his decision. He would follow her and listen to whatever she had to say. Rose nodded and motioned for Frey to follow her, then remarked that she knew he was a good teacher. Frey, puzzled by her comment, couldn't help but ask what she meant. He questioned whether she had somehow seen through his thoughts, though he was skeptical of the idea. When they arrived at the mansion, Frey was struck by its grandeur, his eyes widening in amazement. He remarked that he had thought the castle appeared out of nowhere, but quickly realized this was not the same forest they had been in before. He pieced it together the moment they had crossed the gate. They had been transported here. The thought struck him that Rose had used transfer magic to bring them to this place. Frey's mind raced as he tried to make sense of what had just happened. There had been no sign of Rose reciting a chant or performing any visible magic before they arrived. He wondered if there was some kind of hidden magic in the hut or at the door that facilitated their transfer. Doubt crept in as he questioned whether she had orchestrated the entire situation just to get him here. His thoughts turned to her master. Who could they be, and what was their true intention? The mystery deepened. Frey and Rose walked down the hallway, with Frey commenting on the mansion's spacious interior. He expressed his desire to meet the students before meeting their father. Rose assured him that this was exactly what she had planned. She explained that the master of the mansion was not currently present. When Frey asked if he was working, Rose clarified that the master was not. Instead, the castle was dedicated to the education of his daughters. Rose continued to explain that all the sisters lived with their respective mothers, but it was more practical for them to be gathered in the same place. Since the master didn't use the castle himself, he had thought it would be more affordable to keep the daughters here, where they could be educated together. Frey, clearly shocked, reacted with disbelief at the mention of affordability, unable to understand how such an extravagant place could be considered cheap. The students were several girls, all sisters. Frey, still puzzled, asked about their respective mothers. Rose confirmed the details. Frey, after a brief pause, chose not to ask further questions and fell silent, processing the information in his mind. Frey's thoughts raced as he tried to piece together the situation. He wondered if the girls might be illegitimate daughters of an aristocrat, hidden away to keep their existence a secret. However, he quickly dismissed the thought, sensing that the situation wasn't on such a large scale, though he couldn't shake the lingering uncertainty. Rose led Frey to the door and opened it, announcing that they had arrived. Frey, sweating with nervous anticipation, stepped into the room. As he laid eyes on the girls, his shock was immediate. He had not expected this sight, and the realization left him stunned. The sisters reacted with disdain upon seeing Frey. One of them sneered, declaring that he was just as pathetic and weak as she had imagined. Another sister responded, offended, pointing out that Rose had brought a human into their presence. A third sister dismissed him entirely, stating that he was weaker than her and that she had nothing to learn from someone like him. The fourth sister, intrigued, noted that she had never met a human before. Finally, the girl in the hoodie muttered a sharp, dismissive remark, calling him pathetic. Frey's eyes widened in shock as he observed his students more closely, noticing the horns, pointed ears, and fangs. His mind raced, and he asked, "These girls are demons?" His surprise was evident. Rose calmly confirmed, stating that they were indeed his students and the daughters of the Demon King, Hazar-sama. For centuries, two races, humans and demons, have been locked in an unending conflict, constantly disrupting the balance of power. Two pivotal figures stand at the heart of this struggle, the hero and the Demon King. Frey is a teacher at an academy dedicated to training the next generation of heroes. However, his routine was shattered when he received a startling new assignment. Frey was to become the teacher of the Demon King's daughters. Rose confirmed that Frey would be the teacher of the Demon King's daughters. Isna was shocked upon hearing this and remarked that having a human as their teacher was a bad joke. One of the Demon King's daughters observed Isna's confusion and pointed it out with a hint of amusement. She noted that the gathering was meant to determine who would be qualified to take their father's place. The fact that they had all been brought together in one place left little room for any other explanation. She silently criticized Isna's inability to grasp the situation, dismissing her as unprepared and unfit for the challenge ahead. Frey noted Isna's name and considered whether the girl standing to her left might be her sister. He speculated if their heights indicated their ages, possibly arranged from left to right. Startled by his overthinking, Frey realized he was once again trying to find patterns and connections, a habit he couldn't seem to break. Isna confronted her sister with sharp frustration, accusing her of being overly bossy. In response, her sister dismissed the comment with cool confidence, justifying her behavior as a natural extension of her abilities while subtly questioning Isna's own. The tension between them simmered, their words laced with unspoken rivalry as the conflict between the two sisters grew more intense. Frey suddenly shouted, his voice laced with urgency, questioning whether they knew the dangerous buildup of magic power. His concern grew as he wondered if they seriously planned to engage in a magical battle. Meanwhile, Rose, the maid, remained calm and composed, reassuring Frey with a gentle response, telling him not to worry. The other sister remarked that while the relationship between Isna and her sister was tense, they hadn't resorted to hurting each other. Frey, processing this, muttered to himself that it seemed more like bullying. Stepping forward, he moved to the center to stop the growing conflict. He voiced his disapproval, stating that this wasn't right. As he intervened, his thoughts drifted, hoping this kind of conflict wouldn't become a daily occurrence. The five sisters were left puzzled and shocked by Frey's intervention. Observing their reactions, Frey noted that he had successfully captured their attention, though he remained uncertain about the one cloaked in a hood. He also observed that the two sisters didn't appear very skilled with magic, which gave him cause for further consideration. Frey analyzed the situation, noting that he had successfully positioned himself between the clashing magical powers of the two sisters. He observed that their magical attributes were distinct from each other, yet their overall levels of magic were nearly equal. Each time one sister cast a spell, such as fire, the other was poised to counter it immediately, their actions demonstrating a tense and perfectly timed rivalry. One of the sisters laughed, amused, and casually declared that she had enjoyed herself. With a dismissive tone, she announced the meeting was over and that she was heading back to her room. Frey sighed, exasperated by the situation, but before he could gather his thoughts, Isna turned her sharp words toward him. She warned Frey not to get carried away just because he seemed to possess abilities, insisting that the display of magic matching theirs didn't mean she or her sister hadn't been serious in their efforts. Her words carried a mix of frustration and defiance, reflecting her determination. Frey apologized, explaining that he had assumed it was just a playful rivalry between sisters, though he added that it was better to be cautious and ensure nothing worse occurred. Isna, her frustration clear, responded firmly, declaring that she would never accept him as their teacher. Her words were filled with resolve, making her stance unmistakably clear. One of the five sisters called out to Frey, swiftly moving to almost kick him in the face. With a mocking tone, she remarked that, given how he had intervened between them, she had expected him to have better reflexes. Before Frey could respond, another sister leaped over him, dismissing his lack of reaction with a sarcastic remark. She called him boring, her playful taunt only adding to the moment's tension. The other sister apologized for her sibling's behavior, but Frey reassured her, knowing she wouldn't strike him. Feeling a bit out of place, the sister acknowledged that her siblings were all incredible people, but she didn't feel she had the same talent they did. Despite this, she was determined to do her best and continue the training, vowing to put in her full effort. She then turned to leave for her room, but in her haste, her foot accidentally bumped into Frey's, nearly causing her to stumble. Frey immediately apologized and asked if she was okay. The sister reassured him, insisting she was fine but still feeling embarrassed. As she tried to regain her composure, Rose, the maid, overheard the exchange and, teasingly, remarked that she never thought Frey would break his usual rule about not touching his female students. Frey, flustered, quickly explained that he only made exceptions when someone was in danger. He quickly added that he hadn't even accepted the job in the first place yet, which left Rose momentarily confused. Feeling the awkwardness, Frey quickly suggested they move on and go somewhere else. Frey asked, unsure if they were the daughters of the Demon King. Rose confirmed with certainty, explaining that they were the daughters of Demon King Hazar-sama. Frey, still processing the information, nodded thoughtfully. He couldn't help but express his surprise, remarking that, Given the size of the castle and the lavish accommodations, he hadn't expected such treatment. He added that receiving such a furnished room would have been impossible with his previous job. Frey turned to Rose, seeking clarification about the red-haired girl's comments that the discussion had been about who would be qualified to take over the position of Demon King. Frey was taken aback by the idea, questioning whether Rose expected him, a human, to train the next Demon King. Rose explained that it was a request from the master, who had specifically chosen Frey. She clarified that it was up to him to accept the request. Rose then suggested that Frey take the night to think about it before she quietly left his room, leaving him alone with the weight of the decision. As Rose was leaving Frey's room, someone called out to her. The sister, curious, asked if the human would take the job. She expressed doubt, pointing out that, after all, he was a human and likely wouldn't do what the demons asked of him. Rose reassured the sister calmly, telling her not to worry. She then explained that Frey had 3 reasons for considering taking the job. First, his bad reputation among humans made it difficult for him to find work. Taking the position could offer him an opportunity that might be hard to come by elsewhere. Second, working with demons was undoubtedly complicated for a human, and it could be dangerous for his race. However, Frey always maintained a strong sense of balance, distinguishing between good and evil, which might have driven him to take on the responsibility despite the risks. Frey lay in bed, lost in thought. He couldn't shake the frustration, realizing he was repeatedly stumbling over the same issue. His mind wandered to the girl. How could she have such high hopes for him when they had just met? He wondered if she was silently judging him for witnessing the scene earlier. The thought of turning down the job lingered in his mind. If he refused, he wouldn't have to face the situation again. But even then, he wasn't sure if avoiding it was the right choice. His thoughts circled back to the same uncertainty, keeping him awake in the silence of his room. The next morning, everyone was taken aback in the classroom when Frey, the teacher's, presence was unexpected, and a hushed silence fell over the room. Frey greeted the students with a calm, good morning, breaking the stillness and signaling that the day was about to begin. Frey couldn't shake the feeling that the girl seemed oddly happy to see him despite having just met. He didn't understand what she expected from him. Perhaps, he thought, she was simply looking to regain her lost confidence. Later, the sister asked Lady Rose about the 3rd reason Frey might accept the job. Rose answered with a simple explanation. The reason was that being a teacher was Frey's true vocation. In the classroom, Frey stood before the students and addressed them. With a firm tone, he introduced himself, stating that, as of that day, he, Frey Garnet, would be their teacher. And the education of the Demon King's daughters begins now. As the class began, Frey quickly noticed that one of the daughters had fallen asleep. Without hesitation, he tossed a piece of chalk toward her, and the sharp impact woke her. She jolted up, exclaiming in surprise as the chalk hit her. The girl, clearly irritated, demanded to know what Frey was doing. Frey calmly explained that he had been trying to wake her up, pointing out that she had fallen asleep immediately after his self-introduction. He jokingly asked if he was that boring or if she had simply not slept well the previous night. The girl, not at all impressed, muttered that human classes were boring. Then, her curiosity shifted to Frey, questioning how he knew her name, wondering if it had something to do with magic. Frey, unruffled, simply replied that he had read her file, leaving her to process the unexpected answer. Fia gently nudged her sister, urging her to pay attention and listen to what Sensei had to say. Frey, after taking note of the sleepy girl's reaction, turned his attention to the rest of the class. He expressed that he wanted each of them to introduce themselves. He asked them to state their names and their skills, starting with Anna. Anna stood up and introduced herself, speaking in a modest tone. She mentioned that she didn't have any special skills, though she had some proficiency in swordsmanship. She ended her introduction with a polite gesture. Though her words seemed humble, Frey couldn't help but think that her self-deprecating manner could also be a subtle way of saying she was proficient in many things and might not feel there was much he could teach her. The next sister introduced herself confidently, stating that her name was Asuna. She explained that she was good at many things, but her specialty was magic. Frey sensed unease. Certain Suna disliked him even more than San. With her magic, he couldn't shake the fear she could easily defeat him. Next, it was San's turn to introduce herself. She stood up and stated that she was good at physical exercise. Frey, observing her, noted that San had a bright and friendly personality, but he could also sense a strong repulsion towards him. Next, Fia introduced herself nervously, stating that she was the 4th daughter and didn't have any special skills either. However, she quickly clarified that her lack of skills wasn't meant in the same way as her sister Anna's modesty. Frey observed her closely, noting that, unlike her sisters, Fia seemed to struggle with self-confidence. He thought to himself that this girl needed a lot more confidence to recognize her potential. Lastly, the final daughter, the one in the hoodie, introduced herself with a simple, "Femme." Frey, observing her, thought that she sounded younger than he had expected. He couldn't quite figure her out yet, and he wished he could get to know her and the others better. However, a lingering doubt crossed his mind. He wasn't even sure if he would still be there in 3 months. Before starting work that morning, Lady Rose informed Frey that the decision to keep him employed would be determined by a test that would take place in 3 months. Frey, surprised by this revelation, asked what the content of the test would be. Rose, however, responded with a vague reply, saying she couldn't tell him the details. As Frey stood in the classroom, his mind drifted to the upcoming test and the pressure it entailed. He thought about the Demon King, Hazar-sama, and how he would evaluate his daughters in a series of tests that would highlight their unique skills. Frey couldn't shake the feeling that 3 months was a short time to make the most of this opportunity. He knew he would have to push himself and his students to achieve the results they needed within such a brief period. As Frey was deep in thought, he was suddenly interrupted by someone calling his name, pulling him back to the present moment. Anna, eager to begin, asked what the first lesson would be. Frey, with a calm yet firm tone, replied that the subject he would teach them would be of his choosing. Anna and San exchanged looks, agreeing that this meant they would likely start with the basics. Frey, pointing his finger to emphasize the point, declared that the first lesson would be arithmetic. San, unimpressed and already feeling bored, let out a quiet yawn. Her disinterest was clear as she looked away, already disengaged from the lesson. She wasn't interested in anything that wasn't physical training. Frey said don't say that she know arithmetic is a very deep and interesting subject plus. He think it's what San needs right now. San, still puzzled, asked what Frey meant. Isuna, noticing her confusion, explained that Frey was implying he would only teach San arithmetic. Turning her attention to Frey, Isuna challenged him, asking if he wasn't confident enough to teach them more advanced subjects. She remarked that it was common for humans, who were weaker in her eyes, to only be capable of teaching basic skills like melee magic. San, feeling provoked, responded angrily, accusing Frey of using his weakness as an excuse and making up strange justifications. Anna, noticing the tension, sighed and commented on Isuna's typical childish attitude, but she couldn't entirely dismiss the point. Isuna's words, despite her tone, had some validity. Anna then turned to Frey, asking why he didn't demonstrate his martial arts skills, testing his abilities for real. Isuna, her suspicion growing, remarked that their father, the Demon King, must be behind all of this. She clarified that while they didn't mind Frey being their teacher, her doubts about his abilities were justified. One of the sisters then added that if Frey could defeat San in a fight, he would certainly be qualified for the job. However, if he couldn't, then the situation would speak for itself. San, overhearing this, began to wonder if they were making fun of her, feeling slightly uncertain about what was being implied. Fia, sensing the growing tension, intervened and told her sisters to stop disturbing the teacher. San and Isuna, both annoyed, quickly responded, telling Fia to stay out of it. Fia, realizing the situation wasn't worth arguing over, fell silent, choosing not to say another word. Frey, speaking calmly, told them that if it made sense to them, he was ready to fight. In his mind, he wanted to warn them that challenging him was a bad idea. He had planned to use this as an opportunity to explain why arithmetic was important, but he quickly realized that such reasoning wouldn't be effective. To truly educate them, he knew he first needed to earn their respect and recognition. Fia called out to Frey, prompting him to turn toward her. She hesitated before warning him that San was incredibly strong, capable of defeating even adults, and was a skilled fighter. Frey, however, simply reassured her that it was okay. Frey clarified that it wasn't a fight, but merely a class, assuring that he had no intention of harming San. He signaled for her to come over, and without hesitation, San dashed toward him. Frey effortlessly dodged San's attack with a simple hand movement. As she continued her relentless assault, he evaded each strike with ease. Analyzing her abilities, he concluded that her mother was likely from the Dark Elf, known for their flexibility, agility, and potent magical abilities. It seemed San was converting that magic into raw physical strength, making it clear why an average adult couldn't match her. Meanwhile, San couldn't help but wonder who this guy was. San's sisters watched the fight unfold. Isuna scoffed, finding it amusing that Frey wanted to act strong, yet did nothing but defend himself. Fia, growing anxious, shook their teacher, worried about what was happening. Anna, however, observed before speaking. She realized that Frey was completely in control, effortlessly calculating and countering every attack. Arithmetic, she thought this precise, measured approach was exactly what San needed. San lay on the ground, exhausted, while Frey stood over her, calmly pointing his fist in her direction. His expression remained steady as if asking whether she was satisfied, and asked San if she still wants to continue. Frustrated, San shouted like a child, complaining that it wasn't fair. She accused him of cheating, unable to accept that she couldn't win. San, still lying on the ground, turned to Isuna, convinced that Frey must have used magic secretly, despite Isuna's assertion that it was supposed to be a fair fight. Isuna, however, calmly explained that there was no indication of magic being involved. San, still confused, couldn't understand why she had lost. Frey, however, remained composed, explaining his approach. He had observed the subtle details of her movements, the gaze, the breath, the pace, and the flow of her energy. Using these, he was able to read her actions and counter them effectively. He pointed out that, unlike San, he had taken the time to think and strategize. If she could learn to do the same, she would become much stronger and train her thinking. That's what arithmetic is for. Frey, noticing San's silence and the trembling, began to worry that he might have pushed her too far. He feared that if he damaged her confidence, it would only backfire. He called out to her, concerned. Suddenly, San vanished from sight, catching Frey off guard. He heard her voice in the distance, challenging him again, asking if he still wanted to fight. Before he could react, San appeared behind him, her presence now looming as she prepared to take him on once more. San's face lit up with excitement as she looked at Frey, clearly thrilled. She eagerly asked him to teach her arithmetic, convinced that mastering it would make her stronger in no time. Frey, taken aback by her enthusiasm, immediately refused. He clarified that arithmetic was only the first step in developing her ability to think strategically, not an instant path to strength. San, filled with excitement, urged them to head to the classroom immediately. Frey, however, demanded that she get down first, already regretting encouraging his students. As he reflected on the files he had received, he realized just how accurate they had been in describing their personalities. Frey observed that San no longer hid her true nature. As the third daughter, her personality was naturally cheerful and kind. Having earned the trust of the three sisters, Frey decided to approach the fourth, Isuna. Without warning, Isuna cast a powerful spell, commanding fire arrows to go forth and scorch everything in their path. The arrows struck a nearby tree, setting it ablaze. Isuna, her eyes fierce and brimming with confidence, challenged Frey. She warned him that defeating San didn't mean she would show him any mercy, urging him to demonstrate his strength and highlighting the difference in their powers. Inside the classroom, Isuna sat in stunned silence, unable to process what she'd witnessed. Thea spoke to Isuna, noticing her stunned expression. San found her reaction understandable, given the circumstances. Frey's extraordinary display of power, firing 2 fire arrows without chanting and effortlessly incinerating a tree larger than Isuna's, was truly remarkable. Thea, remaining composed, assessed the situation before leaving to fetch Frey-sensei. Isuna remarked that the Frey must surely be feeling very proud of themselves now. Feeling that the situation was bad and hoping Isuna wouldn't feel insecure afterward. Meanwhile, Rose had said that she would leave the educational methods up to him and wouldn't tell him what to do. Rose questioned Frey, wondering why he bothered to show his strength if he cared so much. Frey explained that he had faced the same issue at the academy and had to maintain a certain behavior. Thea listened quietly to the conversation between Rose and Frey. Frey explained that he had to make sure the students respected him. He mentioned that educating an aristocrat was challenging, as they couldn't allow a commoner to hurt their pride, and he had been under a lot of pressure. Frey spoke, reflecting that the only ones who listened attentively to his lessons were the students who were commoners as well. As he said this, his mind briefly visualized Lily. Frey reflected, admitting that he hadn't thought about it until he left the academy. He realized that if he had shown more strength, the students might have acknowledged him, and he could have helped more children improve their talents. Rose explained that the human world is a hierarchical society. Even if the former students had wanted to be taught by commoners, they would have been obliged to be educated by those they chose. Frey replied, acknowledging that as a teacher, he should have taken action. He expressed his fear of ruining things despite trying his best, wondering if that was wrong. Rose responded by reminding him that as a teacher, he was still learning, growing, and struggling. Frey then sighed, as if he understood what she meant. Rose made it clear that if Frey didn't achieve good results within 3 months, she would hold him accountable. She expressed hope that he would grow and overcome his fear. Meanwhile, Thea reflected on what had happened with Frey and her sisters, realizing that even a strong teacher like him had to deal with uncertainty. After hearing everything, Thea suddenly ran off, shouting that she would do her best with excitement, feeling highly motivated. Frey headed to the library, thinking to himself that he needed to talk to Isuna and hoping she wasn't too upset about the situation. When he saw her reading, he wondered if she might be reading a reference book on the psychology of demons. Isuna muttered to herself that there was no way she was going to let him beat her, deciding to start with the basics. She read aloud from the book, which explained that magic, or a magical element, was a general term for phenomena that harnessed the particles of the atmosphere. The process involved the recognition, acceptance, allowance, bonding, amplification, and release of the magical elements. As Frey observed her, he wished he could teach her, but felt it was best to leave her be for the time being. He decided to search for a book that piqued his interest and planned to read it elsewhere. Just as he was about to leave, Asuna noticed him and shifted her focus toward him. Frey was reading a book outside when suddenly, San ran up and hugged him, excitedly asking what he was reading. Was it a martial arts book or arithmetic? Frey, with a proud gleam in his eyes, responded that it was neither, but rather a book about Earth Terra, and he spoke with such enthusiasm that a star seemed to shine in his eyes. San, taken aback, was shocked by his response. Frey began to explain the series of novels set in the fictional world of Earth Terra. He described the world as completely imaginary, but so well crafted that it felt real. He mentioned that the most fascinating aspect was the characters, and his favorite was the main character in Volume 3, especially his signature pose. However, as Frey continued explaining the book, San simply left without saying a word, leaving him frozen in place, caught off guard. Frey mused aloud, saying that he was sure the story was popular among both young and old, male and female alike. However, he admitted that he had never been part of a group of people who enjoyed reading. He hadn't realized that human entertainment novels were available here and had thought he wouldn't be able to find the last volume. Frey thought to himself, realizing that Sen now had more confidence in him. He also noticed that Fia was supporting him more and more, and even Asuna, though more reserved, seemed to be showing support as well. Asuna focused, trying to recall the magic she had seen from Frey. She cast a spell, thinking that replicating his magic would be easy, as it seemed he hadn't used all of his power. A thought crossed her mind she would like to face him in a fight someday. Asuna decided to continue testing Frey, though she didn't expect him to be a great teacher. In her mind, he was still just a human employee, and she, after all, was the queen of the castle. The youngest sister, Fem, had been gone long enough, and Frey still knew nothing about her. It became clear that if he wanted to achieve his goal, he would need to get along with the other two. Asuna noticed sudden flames and realized that her magic energy might have been depleted far more rapidly than she had anticipated. Asuna hesitated, a sudden realization dawning on her. Without wasting another moment, she turned away and hurried from the burning tree. Frey paused, intrigued by something unusual, and moved closer to investigate. Asuna followed behind, her thoughts preoccupied with a desire to uncover his weaknesses. Frey ventured into the forest, his keen eyes catching scorch marks scarring the bark of a tree. A trail of footprints led deeper into the woods, guiding his path as he moved farther from the castle. The tracks eventually ended at a hollow in a massive tree, where he caught sight of Fem. Fem's startled expression revealed her surprise as Frey approached. He stiffened, uneasy at the realization that he might have stumbled upon a secret hideout. Certain Fem wouldn't be pleased by his discovery. Frey's eyes widened in surprise upon seeing the book. He exclaimed, realizing it was the last volume of Earth Terra, the story. Fem, curious, asked if he liked the book as well. Smiling, Frey then pulled out the other volumes of Earth Terra, the story, and showed them to her. Asuna crouched behind a tree, carefully watching Frey and Fem. She considered getting closer to hear their conversation, her mind fixed on the thought that if Frey did anything to Fem, she would never forgive him. Frey watched Fem intently, his thoughts wandering. He couldn't quite figure her out. She seemed a bit shy and had a deep love for reading. Everything about her suggested that, despite her age, she still carried the innocence of a child. Suddenly, Asuna's foot stepped on a tree branch, shocking the two to look behind. As Frey looked back, Fem stumbled, and Frey's eyes widened, seeing the face of Fem with a clear blue eyes, and he also thought her hair and skin are very white, almost like a transparent. Fem sitting on the ground widened her eyes, scares that Frey may saw her face, so she attempted covering it with her hood. Frey, as he witnessed the face of Fem, he think that her mother must be a ghost, a rare species that lives between this world and the ghost world. But before he can finish his thought, a huge explosion erupted through the forest. As the smoke vanished, a huge hole left in the middle of the forest caused by the explosion. After that, at the palace, Asuna relaxed in the bathtub. The quiet was broken by her sister Anna's voice, surprised to find her there. Anna had expected to have the bath to herself alone at that hour. Asuna calmly explained her presence, mentioning she'd gotten a little dirty. Anna remarked that she'd heard Asuna had been near the explosion, noting that she seemed unharmed. Asuna started to respond but trailed off, leaving her sentence unfinished. During the explosion, Frey quickly conjured a protective barrier, shielding them from the blast. As the dust settled, he anxiously called out, checking if Asuna and Fem were unharmed. Desperation crept into his voice as he shouted Asuna's name again, hoping for a response. While bathing, Anna mentioned Frey, causing Asuna to react with a startled, embarrassed gasp as she splashed herself. Frey spoke to Asuna, telling her that Fem had locked herself in her room and that he wasn't sure what to say to her. He planned to talk to her later and asked Asuna not to mention what had happened. Asuna replied, noting that Fem was probably asleep by now. Frey visited Rose and asked if she knew something for sure. Rose's expression remained neutral as she responded, mentioning that there had been many incidents around Fem, But this was the first explosion of its kind. Frey responded, recalling incidents from a file, asking if Rose remembered them. Rose confirmed, mentioning the breakage of magical tools and the focus on the magic itself. Frey then stated that he wanted to hear King Hazel's opinion on what to do with Fem and the energy of unknown origin, questioning whether Fem could be allowed to stay. In the bathroom, Anna casually mentioned to Asuna that she thought Frey was talking about what's next for Fem. Asuna, startled, asked how she knew. Anna laughed, admitting it was just a guess, and she had hit the mark. Asuna, clearly irritated, muttered that to Anna. Anna remarked that strange magical phenomena often surrounded Fem, and that an explosion of such unknown origin would naturally attract suspicion. She believed it was an accident, as Fem had no apparent motive. Asuna, frustrated, asked how Anna could speak about it so calmly. Anna shrugged, replying that they were all competitors, after all. Rose explained that Fem had several options: isolation, returning to her mother, or allowing Frey to act on his own. When Frey questioned if she wanted that, Rose confirmed she was entrusted to leave the decision to him. Frustrated, Frey noted that from the beginning, she had left everything to him. Frey, frustrated, asked if Rose was joking, questioning who would want that responsibility and suggesting doing things differently. Rose calmly shared her personal opinion, believing the king wanted Frey to guide Fem onto the right path. Frey questioned whether Rose meant guiding Fem by teaching her to control her powers. The thought crossed his mind if he succeeded. Fem could live a normal life. However, it also meant forcing her to confront her powers, whereas simply removing her from the situation seemed like the easier solution. Frey stood in front of Fem's room, lost in thought when he noticed Asuna approaching. She eyed him suspiciously and demanded to know why he was there and what he intended to do. Fem lay in her bed, the room silent until a faint voice called her name. Asuna recalled a previous conversation, but Frey dismissed her concerns, noting that while their clothes were slightly damaged, they were otherwise unharmed. He turned his attention to Fem, emphasizing the difficulties her powers posed for staying there and subtly suggesting that returning to her mother was an option. Sensing the tension, Asuna attempted to shift the mood. Frey assured Fem that if she wanted to stay and learn to control her powers, he would help her. Asuna, confused, questioned his sudden offer. From her bed, Fem listened quietly before speaking, her voice soft as she mentioned something about Frey's favorite part of the tale of Estella. Fem stretched out her thumb in a gesture reminiscent of the protagonist from the third book of the Tale of Estella. The character often made this symbolic pose with friends sharing joy, finding strength in tough times, or speaking of hope. Frey, recognizing the gesture, raised his thumb. He explained that the pose symbolized trust and a vow before firmly promising Fem his support. Fia and Sen called out to Frey, their voices filled with concern. Frey acknowledged them, and they immediately asked if something had happened and whether Fem was safe. Frey reassured them, but insisted that he would explain everything somewhere else. Frey's next task was to save Fem, who was suffering from an unknown phenomenon. Fia, Asuna, and Sen were talking with Frey when he explained his decision to become Fem's mentor to help her control her powers. San, eager to assist, immediately offered to do anything he could. Frey, grateful, responded by thanking San for his willingness to help. San, puzzled, listened as Frey explained to him, Asuna, and Fia that he would teach Fem separately from the others for safety reasons. He added that if they studied on their own, it would allow him to focus more on helping Fem. Fia comforted San as Frey turned to Asuna, asking her to keep an eye on both San and Fia. Asuna, shocked, questioned why she would help him, demanding that he bow and say please if he wanted anything from her. To her surprise, Frey bowed his head and said please, leaving Asuna stunned. Asuna, feeling conflicted, asked why Frey was being so serious, as if she were some kind of villain refusing to help her sister. Frey smiled warmly in response, thanking her. Asuna, caught off guard, blushed at his sincerity. Frey, turning to Anna, asked if he could count on her help as well. Anna, a bit surprised, remarked that he had finally noticed her. She told him there was no need to bow, agreeing to help, but only enough to avoid interfering with her training. Asuna, feeling frustrated, found the idea of making others bow overwhelming and unnecessary. Frey turned to Anna with a grateful gesture, and Anna responded with a formal acknowledgement, addressing him respectfully. Fia asked if Frey would start training Fem the next morning. Frey explained that he needed a few things first, which he had already requested from Rosa. Until those items arrived, Fem would stay in a private room at the villa. Frey dropped the books in frustration, acknowledging that while it was good to dive into studying the signs, he had found almost nothing on them, let alone on Fem's powers. He thought about ghosts, noting that they rarely engaged in combat and preferred a secluded lifestyle, simply floating around with their main characteristic being their translucent bodies. Fem sat in the bath, gently holding water in her hands. Rose greeted Frey, who apologized for not being with Fem daily, acknowledging the work Rose had checking on her. Rose explained that Femme had asked her to tell Frey he didn't need to come, as she couldn't help him and wanted him to rest. Rose then asked if Femme felt lonely. Reflecting on Frey's promise to help her, Femme expressed her trust in him, believing he would keep his word. Rose whispered to Femme, reassuring her that everything would be all right and that Frey would live up to the trust she had placed in him. Rose said that's it. Frey expressed his thanks to Rose, who replied that she had simply conveyed Femme's words. She added that she had told Frey to reassure Femme that she could trust her and was glad he thought so. Rose then clarified that the only reason she trusted Frey with her mistress was because she believed he might be able to help her, and there was no need for thanks. Rose mentioned that the materials Frey had requested would arrive in 2 days. Frey, impressed by the speed, thanked her. Then Rose left the room. Frey realized that when the materials arrived, he would be busy working. He thought about reading as much as he could before then, but quickly decided that he couldn't afford to wear himself out. Needing strength, he decided to take a nap instead. Meanwhile, in the classroom, San was asleep. Anna, noticing, reminded him that he was the one who said he wanted to study arithmetic. San, still groggy, responded that it wasn't how he imagined it, just numbers going one after the other without making any sense. Anna, puzzled, remarked that San was looking at it as if he couldn't imagine what it was really about. Asuna, comforting San, told Anna she would stay with San that night and asked Anna to look after Fia. Anna agreed, suggesting they head to the playground with Fia. Fia was heavily breathing as Anna noticed and asked what was wrong. Anna pointed out that they had only run a couple of 100 meters and planned to run 10 kilometers. She told Fia to catch her breath and continue when ready. Sen looked bored, and Asuna, noticing, asked if she was thinking about if she went to Anna's shed be running with Anna. She then reminded her to focus on her self-study and told her she would make her memorize the basics of magic. Asuna was motivated and strict in her approach. Asuna, with a killer smile, imagined how Frey would react. She pictured him admiring her teaching skills, thinking she was much better than him. San expressed concern, mentioning that while she wanted to move around, she was worried about Frey, who hadn't left his room since yesterday, and about Femme. Anna replied, acknowledging it sounded silly, but reminded her that they had chosen to trust Frey and needed to believe in that trust. 1 week later, Frey and Femme were in the field surrounded by trees, starting her training. Frey explained that to control her power, she needed to first understand it. Since they didn't know much about her power, they would have to observe it and even touch it to learn more. Frey realized that to help Femme understand her power, he would need to trigger it. However, Femme explained that Frey couldn't summon her power herself yet. Frey then suggested they reproduce a situation in which her power had been activated before. Femme was puzzled by the term reproduce, and Frey, sensing the confusion, apologized, though it only left her unsure of his intentions. Within a blink of an eye, Frey immediately removed her hood, observing her reaction as Femme revealed her face once again. Femme was shocked and a black magic aura suddenly appeared created by Femme. While Frey observing the black magic aura, he suddenly revealed a pair of black gloves adorned with an X marks. He referred to them as a secret weapon, but the purpose of the gloves remained. Femme stood in shock as dark magic surged uncontrollably, fracturing the floor beneath her. Frey's gloved hands crackled with lightning, which shot out and connected to the chaotic magic, binding it in a tense, crackling struggle. Femme called out to Frey, her voice strained with fear. Frey steadied himself, the chaotic magic pushing against his control. As the dark energy intensified, he braced his gloved hand with his other, drawing on recent magical experiments to withstand the overwhelming force. Femme observed the chaotic magic, noticing the strange fusion of two energies swirling together. Frey quickly cast a glowing magic circle into the sky, destroying the unstable force in a brilliant explosion. Exhausted, he collapsed to his knees, stunned as Femme watched with growing concern. Femme's voice wavered as she asked if Frey was okay. He offered a faint smile, brushing off the concern and urging her to share her observations. Sitting together on a log, Femme explained that the magic felt composed of two distinct elements. Frey nodded thoughtfully, acknowledging her insight with quiet affirmation. Frey sat on the log, calmly eating a sandwich. Femme's expression was filled with guilt as she apologized, feeling her efforts had fallen short despite Frey's dedication. Frey's response was steady and reassuring, acknowledging that her ability to discern anything on the first attempt was impressive. Femme's eyes widened in surprise at his words. Frey then handed her a piece of his sandwich, silently encouraging her to rest and eat. Femme glanced at Frey, curiosity in her voice as she asked about the gauntlet and its connection to a staff, a tool used to control magic. Frey nodded, acknowledging her insight, and with a slight smile, he explained that it was indeed called a staff in the human world. He praised her for remembering the details, impressed by her quick understanding. Frey, focused and determined, outlined their plan, explaining the purpose of the exercise once more. He would use the staff to control 95% of the magic, while Fem would observe and manage the remaining 5%. As Fem's understanding grew, he would gradually shift the balance, increasing her control from 20% to 40%, while his own would decrease accordingly. Fem, deep in thought, wondered aloud if she could gain control over the magic herself by using a staff. Contemplating the possibility, Frey explained that what he had done earlier was a brute force application of magic, relying on sheer power. He clarified that the staff was not the primary control source, but a supplementary tool. While the magic could technically be handled barehanded, the staff helped reduce the physical burden and exhaustion, making it easier to manage. Frey viewed brute force as a reckless application of power, noting the significant strain it placed on the body. He was also concerned about the extreme wear and tear on the staff involved. He questioned whether they had enough spare materials to sustain this approach and wondered how long it could last. Frey's thoughts drifted to the grey-line feathers, cicatrice beaks, marrow fluid from ancient dragon species, and various other materials. He realized these resources were valued at a national budget level or something close to it, all for someone born a commoner. With a mix of contemplation and disbelief, he took a bite of his sandwich. Fem wondered if the staff Frey had crafted was meant for her, a gesture from her mentor. Sensing her concern, Frey worried that his gloomy mood might have affected her. He quickly shifted the conversation, asking if Fem had someone she admired. Fem's voice cracked when Frey asked her whom she admired. Reflecting on the nature of admiration, Frey noted that it was like mentorship, though he felt calling it that might sound dramatic. Instead, he explained that it was more about looking up to someone and wanting to be like them, with the act of imagining that person during training being an integral part of the process. Frey worried that the way he had asked earlier might have come off as inappropriate, perhaps even resembling harassment. Meanwhile, Fem began to respond, saying the person she admired, but she didn't finish her sentence. Meanwhile, in the classroom, Anna continued teaching San, who kept attacking her. Despite his relentless efforts, Anna dodged his moves while reading a book. Eventually, San lay down, feeling tired and exhausted. Anna glanced at him and asked if he was okay, reminding him that this was the physical training he had wanted. San replied, urging Anna not just to read books and to focus on their training. She responded that it was her designated reading time, reminding San that she had said she would prioritize training above all else, or so she thought. San mocked Anna playfully, reminiscent of a child. After losing to Frey, Anna observed that San's attitude had changed entirely, leaving her curious about why. At that moment, San reflected on Frey's words, which echoed in her mind. She could not fight using her head. Anna laughed at San, suggesting she might become brighter and stronger if she read a book while fighting. San, visibly annoyed, walked away. Puzzled, Anna muttered to herself, questioning whether San and the rest of her sisters were indeed her siblings and the daughters of their great father. As she reflected on the self-study period, she considered how she had been taking care of them, but wondered if she should increase her time on her training. On day 5 of Fem's training, she and Frey walked through the forest. Frey reflected on her progress, noting that there had been a slight improvement due to familiarity. But her performance was still far from a fundamental solution. He felt a sense of urgency, realizing only about 2 months left until the exam. More than anything, he wanted Fem to be able to live together with everyone again as soon as possible. Frey thought he needed to hurry to the field and start coaching when Fem suddenly stopped, her gaze fixed on something in the woods. He recognized Anna, who was slicing through a tree with her sword. After she sheathed her weapon, the tree ignited, flames quickly consuming it as the scent of burning wood filled the air. Frey and Fem continued to watch Anna. When Frey called her name, Fem snapped back to reality, expressing concern about the fire. She asked if it was okay to leave it burning, worried it might cause a more significant fire. Frey reassured her that the fire was created by magic, so there was no problem. Fem remained puzzled by the situation. Frey explained that the caster can control fire or ice created by magic and manipulate the flow of magical energy. This ability allows them to dictate how far the flames or frost spreads. He reassured Fem that with Anna's level of skill, she wouldn't lose control of the fire, even if she moved away. The flames would remain contained and eventually burn out on their own. Fem looked deep in thought, reflecting on Anna's impressive magic control and feeling a sense of inadequacy. Frey noticed her admiration for Anna and called her name softly. Fem quickly apologized, eager to get to practice. However, Frey suggested they take their time and stroll, perhaps engaging in conversation. Fem hesitated, asking if that was okay, to which Frey nodded in agreement. Of course, the teaching method using the staff wouldn't change. Frey acknowledged Anna's remarkable abilities, telling Fem that if she mastered her magic, she wouldn't lose to anyone either. Fem expressed her trust in Frey, but noted her lack of strength compared to him. Frey responded by sharing that he also used to be weak and hated himself for it. The teaching method wouldn't change, regardless of their conversation. When Fem asked if he still hated himself, Frey replied that he was okay with it now. More than anything, he wanted to help Fem find her strength and confidence. Fem needed to learn to love herself first. Curious, Fem asked how he had overcome his struggles. Frey said, "Well, she will see. Last night, at the mansion, he had been reading research materials on the spectral species. He finished going through all the books, and what's left are the dubious, hatily compiled scraps of information with questionable credibility. At this point, it might be better to drop those research and focus entirely on coaching instead." Just then, his eyes caught an old, weathered paper, sparking a glimmer of renewed interest. Fem's past flashed through her mind, the haunting memory of her transparent body and her face, a constant reminder of her difference. She remembered how some had called it just a characteristic of her species, but deep down, she knew it wasn't that simple. She wasn't like everyone else. She was weird. Yet, at that moment, those thoughts that once consumed her seemed to vanish, replaced by the present, where she was now. Fem noticed Frey looked tired and commented on it. Frey explained that he had found a paper that caught his attention the previous night. He had spent hours researching more works by the same author, summarizing them in a way that made sense to him and adding his insights to the current situation. He handed the paper to Fem, who began reading it. The material revealed a startling conclusion. This world comprises two separate worlds. Fem, intrigued by Frey's findings, questioned if that was his conclusion. Frey explained that he had tailored the material to make it easier for her to understand, even incorporating references from her favorite books. He handed her the paper, urging her to continue reading. Fem, amused by his effort, nodded and proceeded with the rest of the material. The paper featured a cat as the narrator, explaining that their world was known as the present world, which coexisted alongside the spirit realm. The cat described how the translucent appearance of spectral species was likely due to half of their bodies existing in the spirit realm. It also referenced the ritual of the devourer, a sacred practice through which spectral species naturally wielded magic. Fem realized that from this point, Frey had presented his interpretation of the material, blending research with personal insights. The paper noted that Fem, whose connection to the sacred text was weaker than other members of the spectral species, stood apart from them. It suggested that Fem might have harnessed not only negative mana, but also positive mana, much like other species. Fem couldn't help but think that, despite the paper's lack of concrete evidence, the existence of the spirit realms had always seemed like nothing more than a fairy tale. Initially, she thought the idea was absurd, but his genuine belief made her reconsider, especially after that unexpected mention. Blending the two energies hinted at a possible reference to positive and negative mana. Fem intuitively sensed that his conclusion had to be correct. Frey explained his analysis, asserting that Fem's magic was a fusion of positive and negative mana, a true reflection of its nature. However, he turned the question back to Fem, curious about her thoughts and whether she sensed anything herself. Fem's eyes widened in shock as realization struck her. She instinctively acknowledged the truth of Frey's words. In the open field, Frey stood beside Fem, his gaze fixed on his mysterious gloves. Though drained, he calculated that the gloves could hold out for 2 or 3 days. Still, to be cautious, he resolved to recast the technique that night, determined to ignore the steep cost of the materials. Frey activated the gloves, feeling the familiar weight of the ritual as the magic circle formed before them. Both he and Fem stood mesmerized by the swirling energy. When the process was completed, Fem acknowledged it with a nod. Frey let a laugh, recalling his determination not to lose to Anna. Reflecting on his progress, he marveled at how deepening his understanding of magic had led to remarkable advancements, though his control remained unstable. With a few more practice sessions, he felt confident he'd master it. Frey's eyes burned with determination as resolve filled him. With this newfound confidence, he knew he could save Fem. Meanwhile, Asuna and Sen stood together, the atmosphere quiet until Sen broke the silence by asking what Asuna was looking at. Isuna's eyes lingered on the horizon, noting the gloomy sky. Fia approached, reading the concern in Asuna's expression. It was clear what was on her mind. Sen quickly suggested checking on Fem and the others, mentioning how long it had been since they had seen them. Isuna's expression darkened with frustration. Her voice carried a stern edge as she reminded them of the reason they lived apart, Fem's unstable magic. If they got hurt because of it, the one who would suffer most would be Fem herself. Sen proposed keeping a safe distance, suggesting she could climb a tree to observe from afar. Asuna considered the idea and eventually agreed, gesturing for Fia to join them. The 3 sisters walked together, heading to see Fem. As they walked, Fia mentioned Anna, wondering about her whereabouts. Anna was reading a book in the classroom, immersed in its pages. After a quick goodbye, Fia left to join the others. Frey's magic gloves shattered unexpectedly, fragments scattering across the training ground. Both Fem and Frey stood frozen in shock, disbelief etched on their faces. Fem's concern kicked in fast. Frey stared at the shattered gloves, confused. He was sure his energy should have been enough, but maybe his more profound understanding of Fem's magic had pushed its output beyond control. Fem's face was filled with concern as she realized the situation. Her magic had reached its limit due to the intense events. Frey shouted her name, his voice sharp and urgent. Fem's voice cracked as she stammered apologies, guilt and exhaustion overwhelming her. Frey steadied himself, gripping the surging power in his hands. Despite the strain, he managed a confident smile and gave Fem a reassuring thumbs up. Fem's expression softened, the concern fading from his face. He whispered to himself, reflecting on his past. He used to despise who he was, lost in a dark, chaotic place. Yet somehow, things had changed. There had been someone who made that possible, always staying by his side without being asked and offering warmth through cheerful smiles. That memory lingered in his heart. A faint yearning crept in as he wondered if someone like that would appear for him again. If they did, perhaps he could learn to like himself, too, honestly. Fem's gaze softened as his thoughts drifted to a scene from the past. He recalled training alongside Frey, the memory vivid and warm. Frey was barely hanging on, his body shaking as the magic bubbled and pulsed wildly, ready to explode. He knew he was at his limit, but one thought kept him focused. He had to get Fem out of there. Pushing through the agony, he summoned the last remnants of his strength, his desperate determination cutting through the chaos. Fem's chest tightened as doubt gnawed at him. She still couldn't bring herself to like who she was. But one thing was clear: if she couldn't protect Frey right now, she'd only end up hating himself more. Determined, she braced himself. Determined, she stood his ground. Then the magic erupted, blasting toward the sky. Sen walked through the forest with Fia and Asuna, heading to see Fem and Frey. She suddenly paused, eyes sharp as if noticing something. Fia called out in surprise while Asuna calmly asked if she saw anything. Fem raised her hand to the sky, and the magic followed her command, spiraling upward in a powerful surge. Sen spotted the blast from the treetops, her eyes widening in surprise. As the magic dissipated into the air, the rain clouds overhead faded, leaving the sky clear and serene. Fia's eyes widened with curiosity as she noticed the distant blast. Asuna's expression turned serious, concern creeping into her voice as she considered the possibility that something had happened to Fem and the others. Without wasting a moment, she called Sen, urging her to report back. Still focused on the scene, Sen hurriedly requested to wait. Frey and Fem stood in the training ground, the atmosphere charged with fading magic. Fem's expression lit up with surprise as she realized her success. Frey's face, however, was clouded with guilt. Fem tilted her head, confused by his reaction. Frey's thoughts raced with self-blame. He should have accounted for Fem's heightened awareness amplifying the magic's power. His failure to ensure the gloves, staff, and his condition were in perfect shape now seemed like a naive oversight. Shoving aside his regret, Frey asked how Fem felt about her control over the magic. With a confident smile, Fem pointed her fingers and confirmed her success. Her happiness was infectious, and Frey's initial shock melted into overwhelming relief as his eyes brightened with joy. Fem's face flushed at the compliment. Embarrassed, she pulled her hoodie over her head and glanced at Frey. His eyes still sparkled with joy, but his expression softened with concern. He wondered if he had failed to teach her confidence. Fem, still blushing and visibly uneasy, quickly reassured him, though her voice carried a hint of worry. A voice echoed from the woods, drawing Fem's attention. She glanced toward the approaching figures, recognizing them immediately. An alarm flickered in her eyes as she turned back to Frey. Frey lay on the ground, exhaustion as evident despite the bright pride still shining in his eyes. With a faint smile, he urged Fem to go home and whispered he would sleep for a bit. Frey fell asleep peacefully. Blushing, Fem turned and ran, clutching her hoodie. A lingering thought echoed in Fem's mind, questioning whether she still felt uncomfortable showing her face. She pulled it off, letting the breeze touch her face. Her eyes gleamed with confidence as she smiled and sprinted toward her sisters. Asuna walked through the hallways, smiling and softly singing to herself. Her thoughts drifted to yesterday when Fem and her sisters, including Asuna, Fia, and San, had expressed relief that Fem's issue seemed resolved. Exhausted, Fem had fallen asleep right away, but today felt different. Upon entering the room, Asuna was met with Fem's bright, wild smile. Fem rushed toward her and wrapped her in a joyful hug. Fem beamed and expressed her gratitude, thanking Asuna for stepping up as a teacher and giving lessons to everyone. Asuna, caught off guard, blushed deeply. She replied that it wasn't just her effort. Anna had also helped teach lessons. Besides, she added, the one who truly supported Fem the most was Frey. With his unwavering strength, Asuna thought momentarily and decided it wouldn't hurt to show Frey a little gratitude for his efforts. As she strolled down the hallway, she spotted Fem nearby. Curious, Asuna quietly sneaked closer and saw Fem talking to Anna. Fem's expression brightened at Anna's presence. Anna acknowledged Fem's progress, noting how she had learned to control her power. Anna admitted that when she first learned about Fem's uncontrollable strength, she thought that no matter how exceptional Fem's talent was, without mastery, she wouldn't be qualified to be a candidate for their father's successor. Fem looked nervous, beads of sweat forming on her forehead. But Anna's expression softened into a smile as she added that in this battle for succession, her greatest rival might be Fem. Anna turned and walked away, leaving Fem standing with a flushed, shy expression. Flustered, Fem slapped her cheeks, trying to regain composure. Nearby, Asuna pressed her hand against the wall, unintentionally cracking it. Anna noticed the damage and glanced at Asuna curiously, her gaze sharp as she assessed Asuna's tense posture. Anna asked Asuna if she also wanted to have private lessons from Frey, similar to Fem's experience. Meanwhile, Frey and Sen were engaged in physical training. Sen relentlessly attacked while Frey skillfully dodged each strike with ease. Despite her determination, Frey observed flaws in her footing, particularly her connection to the ground. Sen, clearly puzzled, seemed curious about the concept as they pressed on with the session. Frey observed Sen thoughtfully, weighing the limited time left until the Demon Lord's trial. Ideally, he'd spend more time teaching her, but with just over 2 months remaining, he considered whether another diagram might help clarify things. A sudden rustle caught his attention, and as he turned, he noticed Asuna standing beside him. Frey noticed Asuna approaching and assumed she wanted to talk. He turned to San, signaling the end of their session and suggesting they continue tomorrow. San protested, offering to keep training while he spoke with Asuna. However, Frey remained firm, dismissing the idea of half-hearted training. San stood speechless at his firm response, her thoughts swirling. Typical Frey, she mused to herself, always so strict and unwavering. Frey turned his attention to Asuna, asking what she wanted to discuss. Asuna hesitated, her expression shy, before bringing up Fem's situation and expressing her gratitude. Frey acknowledged it casually. Asuna, with a hint of curiosity, remarked about the expenses Frey seemed to have incurred during the process. Asuna, trying to stay composed, admitted that since Frey had saved Fem, she couldn't be too hard on him. Still, she hinted at some concern. Frey visibly gloomed, his thoughts darkening as he recalled the expenses. He had used materials on a scale rivaling a national budget, and some form of punishment seemed inevitable. Asuna's expression shifted to alarm as she asked if Frey had spoken to Rose yet. Frey admitted he hadn't, explaining that he hadn't found the time between yesterday and San's eagerness for training this morning. Frustrated, Asuna declared she'd handle it herself and turned to leave. Frey called after her, but she was already on her way. Asuna marched toward Rose, her voice echoing through the hallway as she demanded what their father had said about Frey's treatment. Frey trailed behind her, exasperated, telling her to stop. Asuna shot back, saying he could have just grabbed her arm if he wanted to stop her. Frey calmly responded, unwilling to risk touching a student's body, leaving Asuna completely confused by his reaction. Rose maintained a composed demeanor, acknowledging the matter and clarifying that the expenses related to Fem Ojusama's lessons were entirely within the bounds of their contract. Asuna's expression shifted to one of surprise as she questioned the unexpected response. Rose mentioned that when Frey first arrived at the castle, they had already discussed his job, objectives, and compensation. Asuna raised an eyebrow at the mention of compensation, and Rose casually explained that Frey could request anything since there was no practical use for cash in the castle. Asuna's eyes widened so those materials were ordered as part of his compensation deal. Asuna turned to Frey, puzzled, and asked what he had been so worried about was it exceeding the compensation limit. Frey explained that there had been no upper limit in the first place, so he had taken advantage of that loophole to request the materials. However, while the Demon King approved the purchases, Frey was sure he wasn't thrilled about it. Rose confirmed this, recalling how the Demon King had seemed noticeably displeased during their communication. Asuna furrowed her brow, wondering aloud if Frey was essentially calling the Demon King stingy. She then noted that the materials were technically a business expense, merely labeled as compensation to save face for Frey. However, requesting such items as compensation seemed out of line. Did that mean Frey would avoid any repercussions? Rose reassured her, explaining that the only critique would be for Frey to request what he wanted next time. Asuna's expression lit up with relief, clearly pleased by the outcome. Frey looked at Asuna with concern, calling her name. Her expression turned flustered before she suddenly shouted, insisting that if he were punished, Fem would feel responsible all over again. Their conversation was interrupted by a voice exclaiming, "Oh my," from nearby. A maid with cat-like features appeared, her expression playful as she observed Asuna. Asuna flinched in surprise, clearly recognizing the newcomer. Frey looked puzzled, his curiosity evident. Rose, maintaining her usual composure, silently acknowledged the maid, indicating she was another servant in the castle. Rose explained that her responsibilities, including class-related tasks, had kept her occupied, prompting her to delegate a portion of the workload. Taking advantage of the moment, Reno made a cheerful entrance, finally introducing herself. Frey reflected on the immense challenge of managing a castle of this scale. He had initially thought Rose couldn't handle it alone, but even with Reno assisting, it still seemed overwhelming. Both of them, however, clearly weren't ordinary individuals. Reno caught Frey staring and tilted her head, making a teasing comment. Frey flustered slightly, trying to explain himself, while Asuna casually dismissed the situation. Knowing Reno's playful nature, Reno blushed, mentioning her loyalty to Rose with a nervous stammer. Rose confirmed it with a bold statement, adding an unexpected suggestion that stunned Asuna. Frey's expression twisted in disbelief, trying to comprehend the situation. Reno, still oblivious to the tension, glanced at Rose with curious admiration. After that, Asuna lay in bed, restless and flustered. Rose's strange comment echoed in her mind, making sleep impossible. She tried convincing herself it wasn't her concern, but the thought lingered stubbornly. Frustrated, she shifted uneasily, trying to clear her thoughts. Frey stirred from his sleep, sensing someone nearby. His eyes adjusted to the dim light, revealing Rose in his room. Her sudden appearance seemed unusual, prompting his concern. She spoke calmly, mentioning that her earlier statement had only been a joke. However, living in a castle filled with beautiful ladies had made her realize something she hadn't considered before. Rose made an audacious gesture that left Frey stunned. The atmosphere became tense and bewildering as Frey struggled to process the surreal turn of events. Meanwhile, a girl with a horn and a mole below her lips wandered through the castle hallway, looking bored. She sighed, her thoughts drifting. Maybe she'd sneak over to see the human teacher and Asuna-chan while she was at it. That idea made her grin slightly as she kept walking. Back into the best part of the story, Frey's face sweated as he saw Rose's juicy melons. He was shocked as Rose lay down on him. He asks Rose if she's been drinking too much, but the thirsty maid touches his straw and wants to sip his coconut juice. Rose said to him to relax his body and use her however he wished, and the battle began between the teacher and maid. As Rose sat on Frey's lap, her face turned red, commenting that she could feel the stick of the teacher, making her body so happy. She then, please, not just her melons, wanted Frey's stick inside her cave. She then cried happily afterwards. But suddenly, the atmosphere was broken by a loud voice calling out. Frey snapped awake, heart racing, still shaken by the vividness of the dream. His surroundings took a second to register, confusion setting in as he tried to understand what had just happened. Frey turned his head from side to side, his expression mixed with embarrassment and shock. He couldn't believe what had just happened, his mind racing as he wondered what had gone wrong with the seductive developments he had been following earlier. Reno looked at Frey, his expression filled with confusion. Frey, lost in thought, quietly reassured himself that it couldn't be true. There was no way Rose would act like that, not after just making some strange joke the day before. It simply didn't make sense. Reno remarked that Frey looked like someone had played a prank on him. Frey's thoughts spiraled. A prank? He paused, considering the possibility. If it were Asuna, it might make sense. He then remembered Asuna's mother is a succubus, the master of dreams and human hearts. A bewitching clan known for their fiendish allure, weaving magic to control and seduce. Reno was surprised by Frey's sudden silence and couldn't help but point out how strange he was acting that day. With a playful expression, she continued, teasing him lightly. She joked about the possibility that he had an erotic dream the night before, imagining an exaggerated scenario where he'd forced her head down against her will. The whole thing was meant to be a silly, teasing comment, but it only made things awkward for Frey. On a sunny day, Frey walked down the hallway, thinking Reno is such a really handful, right on his first day off in ages. Reno then popped up, teasing him about how he hadn't woken up yet, so she came to check on him. Frey, frustrated, couldn't help but think it was his day off, and he needed rest. As Frey walked through the hallway, he accidentally bumped into Rose. She greeted him with a soft voice calling his name. Hearing this, Frey sweat as he remembered his wet dreams last night with Rose. The sudden embarrassment flushed his face, and he struggled to keep his composure before her. Rose, noticing his discomfort, grew puzzled and took a step closer to him. Her concern deepened as she wondered if he was unwell, offering to take him to bed. Frey, flustered, could only try to shake off the lingering awkwardness. Visibly shaking, Frey assured Rose that he was fine, though his discomfort was evident. Rose, still concerned, responded with a calm reassurance, offering to help if anything happened. Frey suddenly turned and ran off, muttering a hasty goodbye. Rose stood there, watching him, completely puzzled by his strange behavior and sudden departure. Frey stood there, gasping for breath, feeling the frustration of being unable to relax on his rare day off. With a sigh, he muttered to himself, considering the idea of teaching his students the importance of rest in one of his future lessons. Just as he tried to collect his thoughts, he heard a voice calling out, followed by footsteps approaching the gate. Turning in that direction, Frey saw someone waiting for his attention. A girl waited anxiously by the gate, visibly relieved when Frey approached. She gestured for him to open it, explaining her failed attempt to sneak in as a surprise. Frey frowned, wary of her presence. Outsiders weren't allowed, and the horns on her head hinted at demonic origins. Despite her claim of castle affiliation, he knew the decision wasn't his alone. Frey nodded and assured the girl he would call someone to confirm her entry, asking her to wait. As he turned to leave, she suddenly stopped him, leaning in to kiss him. Frey froze, stunned by the unexpected gesture. Before he could react, Reno came rushing toward the gate, alarmed by a distant cry for help. Her eyes widened when she spotted Frey and the girl together. "Ichel," she muttered in surprise, recognizing the girl standing before her. Ichel greeted her warmly, seemingly unbothered by the commotion. Reno's eyes narrowed as she pointed at Frey, demanding an explanation. Ichel responded with a carefree laugh, brushing off the question. Still, in a daze, Frey finally regained his senses and muttered under his breath. Ichel's thoughts wandered back to the moment. She mused over how simply staring at him had made him zone out. Was it the kiss? Did it feel that good? A sly smile tugged at her lips. Her teasing didn't stop there. Ichel leaned closer to the fence, her voice playful. She seemed amused by the situation, hinting that she could have done more without the barrier between them. Her words lingered, a mischievous invitation veiled beneath a playful tone. Frey shook off the lingering haze, his voice steady as he broke the illusion spell. He admitted he was glad Reno had arrived when she did, realizing something strange had been done to him. He feared he might have lost control without her interruption and attacked Ichel. His words hung in the air, tinged with both relief and wariness. Reno's expression turned serious as she identified the woman before them, Ichel, one of the Demon King's wives and Asuna's mother. Ichel acknowledged the introduction with a graceful smile. Frey's eyes widened in disbelief. The revelation left him reeling. Asuna's mother, he realized, piecing together the implications. It dawned on him that Ichel had likely heard of him as Asuna's teacher and had devised a subtle test to evaluate him. Though seemingly minor for someone of her power, her illusion was overwhelming compared to anything Asuna could produce. The thought unsettled him under normal circumstances. He might not have even recognized it as an illusion and would have been utterly consumed by it. Frey credited his ability to resist Ichel's illusion to his vivid dream that morning. Ichel's amused expression suggested she was impressed, though Frey dismissed the notion as nothing more than the self-control expected of a teacher. Asuna froze in shock at the sight of her mother. Ichel smiled warmly, her presence unexpected. Without hesitation, Ichel ran toward her and embraced her tightly. Asuna, though taken aback, quickly reminded her mother that visits were strictly prohibited until the exams were over. Ichel's playful demeanor didn't waver as she admitted she couldn't resist coming to see her daughter. Asuna's expression hardened as she threatened to inform their father, but Ichel responded with a pleading look, clearly hoping to avoid trouble. Frey observed the interaction between Ichel and Asuna, sighing to himself. It was clear that Ichel had come out of concern for her daughter. Her actions made sense now she had even tested his abilities, despite having just met him, to assess whether he was a suitable teacher for Asuna. Ichel's eyes gleamed with amusement as she responded to Frey's thoughts. She walked toward him with a mischievous smile. Her tone was playful, almost teasing, as she casually revealed that the earlier encounter had been an illusion, a little service to help relax a hardworking teacher. With a sly glance, she added that it was hard to resist since Frey was so adorable. Asuna's face turned red with outrage as she stomped toward Frey, her voice rising in disbelief. She couldn't hold back her frustration, fuming over his earlier declaration about never laying a hand on his students. Now, he was getting involved with their parents instead. Each stomp echoed her indignation as she glared at him furiously. Frey explained that he couldn't forcefully push Ichel away due to his position. Asuna glared, accusing him of not wanting to. Before they could argue further, Ichel grinned mischievously and shoved Asuna into Frey, making them stumble into an awkward hug. Both froze in shock, their faces burning with embarrassment. Ichel smiled playfully at Asuna, who turned red with frustration, clearly fuming. Anna frowned, irritated by the noise, while Sen glanced around, confused by the commotion. Fia's eyes widened in surprise as she recognized Ichel, unable to hide her shock. Ichel's expression brightened as everyone gathered. She guided them to the dining table with a playful demeanor, effortlessly turning the moment into an impromptu family bonding session. Ichel cheerfully suggested abandoning formalities and invited Rose and the others to take a seat. Rose hesitated, insisting they still had duties to serve. Frey, casually pouring tea, interjected, pointing out that if Ichel herself was saying this, everyone could refill their own tea. Frey glanced at the serving stand, noting the abundance of prepared snacks. There was no need for anyone to keep serving. As he scanned the table, his eyes landed on Fia, who was devouring 5 dishes at an impressive speed. With a cheerful smile, Fia declared between bites that the food was delicious and eagerly asked for more. Asuna and Frey stared in disbelief at Fia, who continued eating enthusiastically. Asuna noted that Fia usually dined in a separate room, so this must have been Frey's first time witnessing her eating habits. Anna frowned and calmly reminded Fia to mind her manners, even during informal gatherings. Asuna's temper flared as she slammed the table, furious. She pointed out that Anna never made such comments during their regular meals, but conveniently chose to do so in front of her mother. Anna maintained her composure, explaining that Echelle merely reminded Asuna not to take advantage of the relaxed atmosphere. Echelle sensed the tense atmosphere and broke it with a playful question. "What kind of person is your type?" she asked, tone light and teasing. Asuna froze mid-bite, clearly flustered by the sudden shift. Despite her daughter's shocked reaction, Echelle smiled mischievously and turned to Anna, signaling her to answer first. Anna reacted with a sudden thud, surprised by the question. Asuna's attention shifted toward her as Anna confidently expressed her thoughts. Without hesitation, Anna praised their father as the epitome of an ideal man, strong, courageous, and a magnificent ruler. She admitted that his only flaw was setting the standard so high that every other man seemed ordinary by comparison. Satisfied with her response, Anna sat back with a heavy thud, clearly pleased. Asuna, however, was visibly outraged. She stood abruptly, her expression fierce, as she gestured passionately, clearly criticizing Anna's sudden lack of composure after lecturing others on proper manners. Anna reflected on her tendency to praise their father, considering it a form of etiquette and wondering how such admiration could ever be seen as improper. Echelle observed her with a knowing expression, recognizing Anna's deep and enduring attachment to the Demon King. It was a bond that shaped much of Anna's perspective. Turning her attention to Femme, Echelle's curiosity grew as she silently posed the same question. Femme's face turned a deep shade of red, and she remained speechless. Her thoughts drifted to Asuna and Frey, the 2 figures who embodied her ideal vision of strength and care. While Fia continued eating, she casually remarked that she wasn't in a position to choose anyone. Unbothered by the weight of the conversation, she turned to Reno with a bright expression and asked for a second helping. Reno responded with a warm smile, promptly agreeing to her request. San continued eating, each bite accompanied by a steady munching sound. Between mouthfuls, she casually admitted that her ideal might be their father too. His strength was undeniable. After a brief pause, she added with a thoughtful tone that she liked Frey. His intense persistence made a lasting impression on her. Realizing how her words might be interpreted, San's face reddened slightly. Her thoughts were quickly spiraling into unintended territory. Asuna sipped her tea thoughtfully, observing the dynamics around Frey. She noted how even San seemed to rely on him, and aside from Anna, it was clear that everyone was conscious of his presence. Despite her observations, Asuna dismissed the thought with a detached air, as if it was irrelevant to her. Echelle's curious gaze lingered on Asuna, silently questioning her stance. The unspoken inquiry caught Asuna off guard, causing her to choke and spill tea from her mouth. Flustered, she composed herself quickly, her expression turning defensive as she silently rejected any suggestion of personal interest. Echelle reminisced with a mischievous glint, recalling how she had seduced many men at Asuna's age. Asuna immediately frowned, signaling for her to stop. Taking the hint, Echelle shifted her focus and turned to Frey, who had remained silent throughout the conversation. With a playful smile, she asked about his ideal type. Frey looked visibly puzzled, questioning why she was involving him. Echelle casually reminded him it was just girl talk. Maintaining a composed demeanor, Frey clarified that he wasn't in a position to be distracted by such things, though he insisted it wasn't because he was copying Fia's earlier words. Echelle chuckled, dismissing the seriousness, calling it harmless chatter. Frey's thoughts wandered as he reflected quietly. If he had to choose, it would probably be someone who could smile a simple, genuine expression that radiated warmth. Asuna overheard his musings and playfully chimed in. She suggested he meant someone with a lovely smile and teased that it was such a simple and down-to-earth preference, ideally in line with his personality. Her gaze shifted toward Rose. Rose's hands trembled, and the plate slipped from her grasp, crashing to the floor. Her face went pale as she struggled to steady herself. Overwhelmed by exhaustion, she silently conveyed her apologies, her expression indicating that she just needed a little rest. Then Echelle requests to wrap things up and calls for Reno to help Rose back to her room to take a rest, to which Reno agrees and help Rose. Leaving Asuna's worried on what just happened. After the dinner, Rose walked back to her room hoping that Rose may feel better by tomorrow. Questioning the way she collapsed, she pondered wasn't it around the time that Frey mentioned his type. She then saw her reflection on the mirror, remembering Frey said a lovely smile. Asuna smiled brightly, unconsciously making herself look adorable. Realizing it, she sighed, wondering what she was even doing. Meanwhile, Frey soaked in the large bathhouse, steam rising around him as he sank deeper into the warm water. The tension from the day began to melt away. The tea party and Her Highness's sudden visit had made it eventful, but now he could finally relax. His thoughts drifted back to Echelle's unexpected arrival. Frey had greeted her formally, but she brushed it off, playfully insisting he call her by name. She praised his ability to break through her illusion, calling it impressive for the teacher chosen by Demon King. Frey remained humble, acknowledging that he wouldn't have stood a chance if Echelle had been serious. She was, after all, one of the Demon King's wives and likely the most potent succubus at the pinnacle of her kind. Echelle's teasing voice lingered in his memory as she posed a curious question, asking what he thought was the scariest kind of succubus. Frey stepped out of the bathtub with a splash, water trailing down his body. He thought briefly about Echelle, a succubus of her status, perhaps not quite as formidable as expected. Walking naked toward the door, his mind shifted to teaching Asuna. There had to be something worth pursuing for tomorrow's class. He decided to revisit certain areas beforehand to check on her progress. With his eyes closed, he opened the door and calmly resolved that if there were work to be done, he'd help provided it didn't interfere with his teaching responsibilities. As Frey opened the door, Asuna stood on the other side, completely naked, her face frozen in shock. His eyes snapped open, which had been closed moments before, and he was equally stunned to see her there. A fleeting thought surfaced in his mind as he whispered to himself, "The scariest succubus is one with a highly devoted and single-minded personality who also happens to be a total masochist." Asuna and Frey froze in shock, eyes wide as they registered each other's naked presence. Asuna's face turned crimson, her gaze dropping before the overwhelming embarrassment took hold. Her knees wobbled, and she collapsed to the floor, unconscious. Frey's concern spiked as he rushed toward her, alarmingly calling her name. After that, Frey bowed his head sincerely, apologizing for the incident the next day. He admitted he had completely messed up and expressed genuine remorse. Asuna brushed it off, saying it was no big deal since it was just an accident. However, curiosity got the better of her, and she asked why he had been in the large bathhouse when he usually used the guest bath. Frey explained that he had been told the large bathhouse was available since everyone else would be using the guest bath for the time being. Asuna's eyes flickered with realization as she recalled hearing the same thing the day before. Asuna's eyes narrowed as she turned sharply toward her mother. Realization dawned, and she accused Echelle of planning the situation by telling everyone to use the guest bathhouse. Echelle, completely unfazed, casually continued eating her dessert. She confirmed it was valid with a lighthearted shrug and remarked there was no need for gratitude. Asuna's frustration boiled over. Gratitude? She couldn't believe the audacity. Echelle appeared genuinely confused, convinced that her actions had brought Asuna and Frey closer. Asuna, mortified, couldn't believe the absurdity of the idea. The notion that two people would bond after an accidental encounter while naked seemed ridiculous. Unfazed by Asuna's reaction, Echelle casually mentioned her first meeting with Asuna's father, only for Asuna to cut her off sharply, making it clear she had no interest in hearing that story. Echelle's expression turned mischievous as she questioned whether anything had developed between Asuna and Frey. She then teased that perhaps she should have joined them in the bathhouse to help the situation. Frustrated beyond words, Asuna demanded that her mother leave. To her shock, Echelle agreed without protest, calmly stating she would go. Asuna stood frozen, baffled by her mother's unexpected compliance. Everyone gathered at the main door as Echelle prepared to leave. With a playful tone, she mentioned that she had planned to stay only one night, hinting that her departure was necessary to avoid upsetting her darling if he found out. Frey quietly observed the exchange, his thoughts lingering on Asuna. Her uncharacteristic silence left a noticeable impression. Breaking the moment, Asuna spoke up, expressing gratitude despite having much left unsaid. Echelle was visibly surprised but quickly softened, pulling her daughter into a warm embrace. She promised they'd meet again after the exams. Rose stepped forward and offered to escort Echelle, explaining that she had connected the door to the Demon Lord's castle with a teleportation spell. Frey's expression softened as he looked at Rose. Relieved, he acknowledged her efforts and hoped she was feeling better. With a renewed focus, Frey announced that it was time to move on with the lesson. San cheerfully waved her hand while Fem gave an enthusiastic thumbs up. Asuna, however, appeared visibly shy. Frey quietly observed her demeanor, thinking that her quarrel with Echelle had likely helped distract her from her worries, though an awkward tension still lingered for her. After that, everyone was seated and attentive in the classroom as Frey began the day's lesson. He explained that the topic was history, focusing on the cycles of conflict and uneasy truces between humans and demons. The most intense conflict in recent history had occurred about 10 years ago. Frey described how the human army had employed guerrilla units to operate independently within demon territory. Among them, the current hero, Lux, achieved remarkable success. As the class absorbed the information, San suddenly spoke up, her tone catching Frey's attention. Frey paused, realizing he wasn't fully prepared to teach the subject. He apologized to the class and promised to revisit the topic later. Fia's expression turned thoughtful, concern flickering in her eyes. The mention of the hero Lux brought memories to the surface. If she remembered correctly, the academy where Frey had previously worked was established to honor Lux's achievements. A lingering question formed in her mind: would Frey want to return to that academy if given the chance? After a brief pause, Frey glanced around the classroom and suggested coming up with a substitute lesson. Noticing Asuna distracted by something, Frey addressed her directly, asking if there were anything she'd like to do. His question caught Asuna off guard, and she reacted with surprise, clearly flustered. When Frey pressed further, wondering if there was no specific class she had ever wanted to take, Asuna's tension remained evident, her initial shock lingering. Asuna's expression hardened as she declared that she wanted to defeat Frey specifically in a magic duel. Her finger pointed at him with determination. Without missing a beat, Frey calmly responded, suggesting they settle it outside. The two made their way outdoors, where a table was set between them as a marker for the impending duel. Both stood facing each other, tension filling the air as the challenge loomed. Asuna confidently announced that the contest would be one of control and precision. With her wind magic, she demonstrated by moving a card gracefully through the air, fluttering it around to form a delicate triangle tower. "Watch closely," she declared with pride. However, her focus briefly faltered as an unexpected thought crossed her mind, an imagined scenario with her and Frey standing far too closely, both naked. Her face flushed as she snapped back to reality, uttering a startled sound. Suddenly, a strong wind blew through the area, causing chaos. Everyone frantically held down their skirts as Asuna's magic spiraled out of control. Anna quickly reacted, casting a shield spell to protect against the wild gale. Asuna's mind jumped to Fem's past struggles with magic. Seeing the wild winds swirling around her, she turned sharply toward Fem, who stood blushing but trying to stay composed. Despite her best efforts, Fem couldn't stop the chaotic gusts. Just as the wind seemed ready to spiral out of control, they suddenly shifted into a steady, smooth flow. Frey stood calmly at the center, effortlessly spinning a ball of wind magic on his fingertip. The air settled around them under his control. Frey had held back at first, thinking Asuna might handle it alone. But when things got out of hand, he knew stepping in was the right call, even if he kept that thought to himself to spare Asuna's pride. Asuna's eyes widened in surprise as she stared at Frey. For a fleeting moment, she saw him as a prince charming, calm and composed amidst the settled winds. Her heart skipped a beat, and her imagination ran wild. In her mind, Frey leaned toward her with a gentle smile, offering to take her temperature with a sudden, unexpected kiss. The thought made her cheeks burn. Snapping back to reality, Frey stood there with a concerned expression, unaware of the scene playing out in her head. He asked if she was feeling okay. Asuna's wild imagination spiraled as she glared at Frey, convinced he was taking advantage of her flustered state. Her face was red with indignation, though Frey had done nothing more than speak calmly to her. Frey sighed, puzzled by her reaction and genuinely concerned. Seeing Asuna looking visibly unsteady, Frey made a decision. He told her to rest in her room and mentioned he'd find someone to stay with her. Before anyone else could respond, Anna unexpectedly raised her hand, volunteering to help. As Anna and Asuna walked together down the hallway, Asuna's brows furrowed with suspicion. She asked Anna what her intentions were, wary of the sudden offer to accompany her. Anna responded nonchalantly, claiming she just wanted to talk. Anna brought up Frey out of nowhere, suggesting that Asuna seemed conscious of him. Asuna's immediate reaction was loud denial, her face betraying her embarrassment. Anna, unfazed, grinned knowingly and pointed out that Asuna didn't need to dodge the question if she was merely curious about Frey's secrets of strength. Asuna was momentarily speechless. To Asuna's surprise, Anna chuckled and confessed she was intrigued by the same thing. Relieved by the unexpected twist, Asuna thought, "Thank goodness you're an idiot." She played along, nodding in agreement, claiming that Frey's strength indeed piqued her interest. In the stillness of the night, Frey snored softly in his bedroom. Outside the door, Anna and Asuna stood, silently discussing their plan. They exchanged a glance before opening the door quietly. Asuna stepped inside, her presence calm and focused. With a subtle wave of her power, she prepared herself to delve into his subconscious, determined to uncover the hidden secrets of his power and the mysteries of his past. Asuna delved deep into Frey's memories while he slept, seeking to uncover the secret of his past and the source of his strength. As she navigated through the fragments of his mind, she was taken aback by what she saw. A massive fire raged before her, its intensity almost overwhelming. Asuna's mind raced, trying to piece together the significance of the fire. It seemed important, yet she couldn't fully grasp the situation. Determined to uncover more, she resolved to go further into Frey's memories, hoping to find the truth behind this haunting vision. Asuna entered Frey's memories and saw a young Frey running through the woods, panting heavily. His breath came in short bursts as he shouted, his voice filled with desperation. Asuna wondered if he was running towards something or fleeing from it. Suddenly, young Frey collapsed on the road, exhausted and weak. A man in a horse-drawn carriage spotted him and ordered the wagon to stop, noticing the child in distress. Young Frey was alone in the bedroom, quietly resting. Asuna observed the scene and realized that this was Frey as a child. She pieced together that it seemed a moment after the burning house incident. At first, she believed she was rewinding his memories, but instead, she found herself in this new scene. The flow of events had shifted, taking her forward in time rather than back to the fire. Asuna observed the disorganized flow of Frey's memories with frustration. It wasn't easy to pinpoint the exact moment she was aiming for. Usually, when she watched a memory directly, it would progress chronologically, but this was different. She sighed, deciding to keep watching for a while longer, hoping that, eventually, the scene would provide context or explanations. Her patience waned, and her irritation grew as she muttered to herself. It had been almost 3 months, and no one had spoken a word in the memory. Bored, she decided to fast-forward the memories to some extent, figuring she could jump around randomly. Eventually, she hoped to land on a moment just before the fire. Asuna stared at young Frey and sighed, deciding to stick with the memory a little longer, having already waited so much. The scene unfolded in an orphanage where the headmaster, the staff, and the other children seemed to care deeply for Frey. A girl opened the door, her attention fixed on Frey with concern. Asuna smiled softly, watching the scene play out, feeling a sense of warmth from the interaction. The girl, Naru, appeared at the door and approached Frey with a smile, eager to play. Asuna observed her closely and recognized that Naru was one of the children at the orphanage. She had been visiting Frey every day, and thanks to her consistent efforts, Frey had started responding little by little. Naru had even been the first to learn Frey's name. As Asuna watched the interaction, she felt a strange familiarity with the child. A faint blush appeared on her face as she realized why Naru's appearance reminded her a bit of Fia, and her lively energy felt somewhat like Sans. Excited by the new books at the library, Naru brought one with her to visit Frey. She showed him the book The Tale of Earthdura and began to read aloud, but he stumbled over the words for a moment. Frey, however, caught her attention, and as she explained that the story was from a different time and a different world, he looked at the book with curiosity. Naru was fascinated by the tale and urged Frey to continue reading. As the pages turned with a soft clatter, Frey finally responded, suggesting that Naru should study and read the book herself. Naru, slightly surprised, stood up and ran off, agreeing that she would do just that. Asuna, watching the scene, felt a bit annoyed and couldn't help but mutter to herself that it was rude. Frey glanced at Naru, who had brought the book with her, asking him to study and teach her. Frey responded by saying he never agreed to teach her. Naru just smiled, undeterred, and with a shrug, Frey resigned himself to teaching her about the book. Naru found it surprisingly easy to understand as they went through it and praised Frey for being a great teacher. She even commented that he would be an excellent teacher someday. Frey, slightly skeptical, replied that it was a bit too optimistic. Asuna, observing the exchange, noted that while the words were murmured, they carried a sense of warmth and happiness. From that day on, Frey began to talk more, little by little. A month passed, and Naru's presence continued to bring small changes to Frey's interactions. Young Frey and Naru stood in the woods, Naru commenting on the nice weather while Frey held a stick, his response a quiet grunt. Asuna, watching from a distance, grew increasingly irritated. She had heard Frey mutter daily that he would thank Naru tomorrow, yet it never happened. Suddenly, there was rustling in the bushes, and before anyone could react, a beast hound leaped toward Naru. Asuna's heart raced as she recognized the creature. Her shock and concern surged as she watched Frey spring into action. Without hesitation, he stepped in front of Naru, using his stick to push the beast's mouth away, holding it back with surprising strength. After a brief struggle, the beast hound finally ran off, growling in the air. Frey stood still, gripping the stick tightly, while breathless and grateful, Naru rushed towards him. She thanked him for saving her, her eyes shining with appreciation. Frey muttered that it was nothing but Naru holding his hands, smiling brightly, calling him strong, and expressing her surprise. She thanked him again for protecting her. His expression darkening, Frey pushed Naru's hands away, visibly upset. The sudden shift in his demeanor took both of them aback. Asuna, watching from a distance, grew furious. She shouted at Frey, demanding that he apologize immediately. Reluctantly, Frey turned to Naru and apologized, his tone subdued. Asuna, seeing the apology, finally felt a sense of satisfaction. Naru and Frey sat on the forest floor, the quiet of the woods surrounding them as Frey spoke. He explained that his father taught him the sword techniques he knew, while his mother had taught him academics. He shared that his father was often away due to work, but when he was home, he would train Frey. Naru, curious, asked what kind of work his father did. Frey hesitated before answering, explaining that his father used to go to the demon world. He was the captain of something called the Strike Force. Isuna, listening from a distance, was stunned. She realized this was something Frey had mentioned earlier during class. Frey continued, revealing more of his painful past. He said that his father had been called a traitor. The day his father returned home after a long absence, their house was stormed by many people. His father and mother fought to protect him, helping him escape, but they were both killed in the process. Frey explained that his father had secretly joined forces with the demons, trying to destroy the kingdom and wipe out humanity. Frey admitted that, while he wanted to believe in his father, he didn't honestly know what his father had been doing in the demon world, or if his mother had died because of the terrible things his father had done. With a bright smile, Naru suggested to Frey that he could go to the demon world to uncover the truth about what his father had been doing. She reminded him that he would be an explorer in the future. Recalling her earlier words, Frey teased her, mentioning that she had said he would become a teacher. Naru responded that Frey could become a teacher who taught students about the things he explored, or perhaps even a sage in the magic world. As Asuna listened to their conversation, she was taken aback, her mind racing in confusion. The idea that Frey might one day become a teacher or a sage seemed so far removed from what she had imagined. She couldn't understand what Naru meant. Frey laughed off the suggestion and dismissed it with a casual remark, unable to picture himself in such roles. Asuna, reflecting on their conversation, once thought that the secret behind Frey's strength lay in his regret for not protecting his parents and his desire to one day go to the demon world. She had assumed that the fire she had seen in his memories was from the time when his parents were attacked. However, she now realized that she had been mistaken. The events that genuinely mattered were still waiting ahead in his memories. Following that, a man approached his officer to deliver a report. He informed the officer of an orphanage on the northern outskirts, which housed several young children. The officer, uninterested, asked what the significance was. The man revealed that one of the children had been admitted when they dealt with the traitor and executed their punishment. The officer, understanding the connection, acknowledged the information. Meanwhile, Frey was in the woods, practicing alone with his wooden sword. He slashed at the tree barks, his focus entirely on his technique. Asuna watched from a distance, observing his dedication to his training. She reflected that she had already discovered the secret behind Frey's strength and could leave the memory anytime. Yet, the timing didn't feel right, and she remained. Suddenly, a rustling noise came from the bushes, followed by a beast leaping toward Frey. The beast barked loudly, startling him. Frey recognized it immediately, shocked by its return. The beast whimpered as if seeking something from him. Despite the previous encounter, the creature was back. Frey was confused. Even though he had heard it before, the beast seemed to keep returning to him. Isuna, watching the scene unfold, guessed that the beast might recognize Frey's strength and had submitted to him. Frey, however, reiterated that he wasn't offering the beast any food. Asuna, growing irritated, disagreed with his assumption, sensing that there was more to the situation than he realized. After some thought, Frey finally agreed to ask the headmaster about the possibility of the beast being adopted into the orphanage. He described the orphanage, mentioning how Nancy's stew was incredibly delicious, how Tommy was the closest to his age, and how Thomas would excitedly talk about Earth Terra, a story that fascinated him. He also spoke of Hannah, the youngest child, who was like a little sister to everyone. Frey seemed to appreciate how kind the other children and the teachers were, and as he reminisced, his mind wandered to Naru and her smile. He quietly noted that Naru had once said he would make a good teacher, but in his mind, Naru seemed more like a teacher than he was. Asuna, observing his thoughts, agreed with his sentiment. She expressed her desire to meet such a good and thoughtful child, laughing as she added that when she returned to reality, Frey better introduce her to Naru. She demanded that he ensure they were still in touch, threatening to strangle him if he told her they had a falling out. Still, she couldn't help but comment on how exhausting it was just watching him practice. With a sigh, she remarked that, even though Frey had said the trip to the training grounds was part of his training, he might want to consider practicing somewhere closer to save her from the fatigue of watching him for so long. As Frey walked, he suddenly spotted a fire in the distance. Isuna, noticing the direction, remarked that it was near the orphanage. Frey's eyes widened in shock, and without a second thought, he rushed toward the scene, horrified. The sight of the flames sent a wave of panic through him, and he shouted as he ran. Isuna, watching him, began to piece things together. The fire she had seen when she first entered Frey's memories, the one she had assumed happened months ago, might be unfolding right now. The realization struck her as she observed Frey's distress. As Frey ran toward the orphanage, his heart raced. He called out desperately for the people he cared about: Tommy, Thomas, Hannah, Nancy, the headmaster, and finally, Naru. His voice trembled with fear and urgency, but all he could see was the overwhelming blaze. The fire had consumed everything in its path, and Frey stood frozen for a moment, unable to process the scale of the destruction. He whispered to himself, "Everyone." Suddenly, from somewhere in the chaos, Frey heard a flat and emotionless voice declaring that the mission had been accomplished. Isuna, who had been silently watching the scene unfold, was struck by the sight of the soldiers standing by, doing nothing to help the people trapped in the flames. They weren't attempting any rescue. She couldn't believe what she was seeing. The fire didn't seem like an accident. Her suspicions grew, and she couldn't shake the feeling that the soldiers were connected to the devastation. As the soldiers spoke among themselves, they mentioned that they had yet to confirm whether Frey, the traitor's son, was inside the orphanage. They noted a few boys of Frey's age, but the focus remained on their mission. Isuna's mind raced with realization, and she understood that these soldiers were likely the same ones responsible for the attack on Frey's house. The pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. As the soldiers continued speaking, one of them admitted that they had never even considered the possibility that the traitor's son might be living at the orphanage. Things had apparently taken a turn when they attempted to confirm his presence and question him. Isuna listened, her confusion growing with each word. The soldier then claimed that the boy had suddenly gone berserk, setting the orphanage on fire and taking his comrades down with him. According to him, the most important thing now was the narrative that the entire family was steeped in depravity. The more he emphasized their villainy, the brighter his righteousness would shine for condemning them. Isuna felt a wave of disgust. Even after realizing that the people in the orphanage had nothing to do with the alleged crimes, this man had still chosen to sacrifice them just because they fit the conditions of his fabricated story. It was beyond cruel. He wasn't just following orders, he was the mastermind behind it all. But then, as she observed him more closely, a dreadful realization crept into her mind. That face, it couldn't be. Was it just a coincidence? A mistaken identity? Or was it possible that the person responsible for this was someone she recognized? The two soldiers continued their conversation, discussing the potential consequences if this incident became widely known. One speculated about what might happen if someone stepped forward with information, but the other dismissed the idea entirely. With a chilling smile, he remarked that anyone aware of this truth would understand the consequences if discovered. They would be killed. He sneered at the thought, mocking the idea that someone who had cowardly fled while their parents were being murdered would never have the courage to step forward. Hidden in the bushes, Frey listened to every word, his hands tightening into fists. Rage surged through him, his body trembling with fury. He was ready to step out, to confront them, to put an end to this. Isuna, watching from within his memories, felt her breath catch. She could see his posture shift and how his muscles tensed in preparation to reveal himself. Her eyes widened in alarm. Then, just as Frey was about to move, a tug at his clothes stopped him. The beast, the same creature that had followed him relentlessly, bit down gently on the fabric of his sleeve, holding him in place. The tension in his body slowly eased. His rage was still burning fiercely, but the simple action forced him to pause. Isuna, watching intently, felt a wave of relief. Tears welled in Isuna's eyes as she watched helplessly. This was only a memory, her voice couldn't reach him. The honest Frey was still alive, making her cries meaningless, yet she couldn't stop his desperate wish to run. Frey's fist tightened, blood dripping from where his nails dug into his palm. His body trembled before he let out a mighty, anguished shout. At that moment, the magic holding the memory together shattered. In an instant, everything around them dissolved. The past crumbled away, and the present rushed back. Isuna staggered, wide-eyed, realization dawning. Her emotions had surged beyond her control, triggering an unexpected magic. The world of memories had vanished. Frey jolted back to reality, his body reacting on instinct. A surge of magic burst from him, sending a forceful wave straight at Isuna. She barely had time to react before being thrown against the wall with a sharp impact. A gasp escaped her lips as pain shot through her body. Frey's expression darkened momentarily, but as soon as he realized who he had struck, his eyes widened in alarm. Panic replaced his initial shock as he rushed toward Isuna. Guilt weighed heavy in his voice as he reached out to her, his concern evident. Frey's expression tightened with concern as he turned to Isuna, confusion and frustration evident in his eyes. Isuna lowered her head, her voice barely above a whisper as she muttered an apology, guilt weighing heavy on her. Tears welled up as she trembled, emotions spilling over. The question burned in her mind: why? Why Naru, of all people? Why did this have to happen to everyone at the orphanage? Frey's body tensed at the mention of Naru and the orphanage. His breath hitched as realization struck, his eyes widening in shock. He turned to Isuna, demanding to know how she could be aware of that part of his past. Asuna hesitated before finally admitting the truth. Frey's expression darkened as he pieced it together. She had entered his memories. A heavy silence settled between them before Asuna's voice wavered again, offering another quiet apology. Knowing she had crossed a line she couldn't return. Frey frowned, his gaze steady as he questioned Asuna. How she spoke about his memories made it seem like the events unfolded in real time. Could her recollections be confused or distorted? The thought lingered in his mind, unsettling him. Asuna, however, remained firm. That part of the past had already been resolved, but something else troubled her. That man's face, what did it mean? She turned to Frey, searching for confirmation. Frey didn't hesitate. Of course, he recognized that face. He had seen it countless times in textbooks and historical records. The man was currently the most famous person alive, renowned even in the demon world. There was no mistaking it, he was the real deal. Reflecting on the past, Frey recalled that the man had once been one of his father's subordinates, a member of the elite strike force. He had visited their home frequently, even before Frey was born. The question lingered, had he discovered Frey's father's betrayal, or had he orchestrated the entire thing from the beginning? Regardless of the truth, the accusations and execution of a so-called traitor had become the stepping stone for his rise to power. He had climbed the military ranks at an unprecedented pace. A few years later, the world learned him by a single title, the hero. Asuna's expression grew serious as she looked at Frey. When she asked him what he planned to do about that so-called hero, there was a weight in her voice, as if she already knew the answer but hoped to be wrong. Frey had never intended to do anything when his father was executed. Back then, he was just a child, powerless to change anything. Even now, he still didn't know the truth. Was his father's death justified, or was it all just a carefully crafted lie? Had that man planned everything from the start? The uncertainty never left him, lingering like a shadow over his past. Asuna felt a deep sadness settle in. No matter the circumstances, what happened to everyone at the orphanage, what happened to Naru was beyond forgiveness. There was no justification for it. Then, it clicked. Revenge. That was the secret behind Frey's strength. Before she could fully grasp its weight, Frey's voice cut through the silence, firm and unwavering. That man, the so-called hero, Lux. He was going to kill him. The next day, a plate of pork katsudon and a bowl of tofu soup sat on the table, their rich aroma making Frey's hunger even more unbearable. His gaze lingered on the food, stomach twisting with anticipation. Just as he was about to dig in, a voice called out. He looked up and Asuna was standing there, dressed like a sultry police officer. His brain short-circuited for a second. His mind struggled to process what was happening. Just a little while ago, after their intense conversation, Asuna seemed shaken. She quietly slipped away, her face uneasy. Even as she left, something weighed on her. Was Frey serious? Would he go through with it? Frey walked down the hallway, his thoughts clouded with regret. The incident had been an accident, but he had still ended up attacking her. She possibly hated him even more than before lingered in his mind. Before he could dwell on it further, a voice called his name. Turning around, he saw Sen standing in a revealing police officer outfit. With a serious expression, she approached him, making it clear that she was there to arrest him. Fia, dressed in a police officer uniform, approached and conveyed that Asuna was calling for him, adding that they were there to assist. Frey looked at her in disbelief. Fia too? He sighed, realizing what was happening. Asuna was probably planning to criticize him for what had happened yesterday. It made sense. While processing the situation, Fia suddenly rushed toward him but stumbled. Without thinking, Frey caught her before she could fall. She looked up at him, cheeks flushed, as he remarked on how often she seemed to trip. Still blushing, she nodded in response. While Frey and Fia were talking, San suddenly moved behind him and snapped a pair of handcuffs onto his wrists. With a triumphant grin, she started singing, as if making an official arrest. Frey sighed to himself. He had wanted to apologize to Asuna properly, but now, on top of everything, he had caught Fia in his arms, too. He didn't have any real complaints about the situation, but still, San turned to Fia with a teasing smirk. She pointed out how bad Fia was at physical activities, laughing as she remarked that even walking seemed challenging for her after all, she fell so often. Fia looked embarrassed, her face turning red at San's teasing. She brushed it off and decided to head to the cafe until class started. As she took off running, she tripped again, landing with a soft thud. Meanwhile, Frey sat in a chair in the interrogation room, his hands cuffed behind him. San, amused, casually announced her departure, leaving with a playful energy, ready to kill time before class. Asuna stood across from Frey, arms crossed, watching him with a tired expression. She had sent a maid to call him, yet somehow, things had spiraled into this situation. She sighed, wondering just what San and Fia were up to. Asuna explained that outfit and the room were arranged by those two. They were probably having fun with it, turning the situation into a joke. Still, the katsudon on the table? That was her idea. Isuna sat at the table, the chair creaking slightly beneath her. She leaned forward, her expression serious. She wanted to ask a few things, but first and foremost, she needed to know why had Frey brought up the achievements of their enemy, the so-called hero Lux, during yesterday's class. Frey explained calmly that Lux had once been part of the mobile strike force before rising to a hero that was simply a fact. Setting aside his personal feelings, he believed conveying that piece of modern history to the class was important. Or at least, that was what he had intended. But when he spoke about it, he realized it had shaken him up more than he had expected. He offered a small smile, admitting that he had let his emotions get the better. Isuna adjusted her hat, considering his words half-hearted. If he was going to teach, he should commit to it fully. If not, then maybe he shouldn't bother at all. Isuna sat there, her face warm with embarrassment as she struggled with her thoughts. She had been so sure of her feelings before, but after learning about Frey's past, all her resentment had disappeared. The urge to hate him had vanished completely, replaced by something else she wasn't ready to admit. She had called him here to apologize for looking into his memories, but the moment she saw his face, the words got stuck in her throat. It felt too late to change her attitude now suddenly. Before she could stop herself, she blurted out a question about what had happened after she saw his memories. As soon as the words left her mouth, she cringed internally. Why was she even asking that? She had already told him it was fine. Isuna casually picked up a piece of meat from the pork katsudon, twirling it slightly with her chopsticks before holding it up. There was a playful glint in her eyes as she offered it forward, insisting that if Frey answered her question, he'd get rewarded. Without giving him much time to react, she leaned in, urging him to open wide. The moment felt oddly tense, her expression shifting entirely between teasing and something else. Frey, however, wasn't having it. He refused, insisting there was no need. But Isuna wasn't backing down. She inched the food closer, determined. If he didn't eat it like this, she reasoned, it would just fall onto the floor. Meanwhile, Frey's thoughts were racing. His frustration was evident as he mentally protested if she wanted him to eat. Maybe taking off the handcuffs would be a good start. Frey reluctantly ate the food before him, chewing slowly as he gathered his thoughts. His mind drifted back to the past. After escaping from Lux, he ended up under the protection of Lord Garnet, a nobleman who had secretly been connected to his father. He was the only person who knew Frey's real identity and had kept him safe all this time. Isuna's eyes widened as she processed what that meant. A noble? Was Frey a noble? The thought caught her off guard, but before she could fully wrap her head around it, a different feeling crept in her heart was racing. She loved him. That realization hit her harder than anything else. But Frey didn't see himself that way. He wasn't a noble, just someone borrowing a name. Lord Garnet was his guardian, nothing more. He had never been adopted, and nothing about his past changed who he was. Isuna paused, recalling something she had heard before. Dream demons drew their strength from the mind, meaning any hesitation could weaken them. It was an inherent debuff to their power, even more than other types of magic. But devotion was different. If a dream demon were wholly dedicated to someone, their emotions wouldn't waver, allowing them to channel their full strength without distraction. In fact, rather than weakening them, their mental fortitude would increase exponentially for the sake of the one they loved. That was the real meaning behind it. Frey took a moment to process the explanation before his curiosity pushed him further. Was Echelle like that too? Isuna immediately freaked out, yelling in frustration. There was absolutely no way she was anything like her mother. Echelle had a habit of sizing up every man she came across, even if she never actually acted on it. Those flirtatious glances were more than enough to make Isuna cringe. The thought alone was unbearable. Still fuming, she swore she would never turn out like her mother. But then again, a memory surfaced Echelle, smiling brightly, gushing about an upcoming date with Isuna's father. She had asked for advice on what kind of present would make him happiest. Her genuine excitement. If there was one thing Isuna had to admit, it was that her mother had always been deeply devoted to her father. That part, at least, wasn't so bad. Isuna sighed and unlocked Frey's handcuffs, feeling frustration and hesitation. Even now, the words she wanted to say wouldn't come out. Frey glanced at her, bringing up that she had seen No, lived his past. She hesitated before admitting it. Memories of Naru resurfaced, and all the things left unsaid weighed on her. Frey hoped that if she took anything from that experience, it would be to live with fewer regrets. With a small, knowing smile, he admitted he still carried his failures and walked out, closing the door behind him. Isuna sat there for a moment, lost in thought. But as she heard his footsteps fading down the stairs, something in her snapped. As Frey descended the stairs, Isuna suddenly rushed out of the room. Her voice cut through the quiet hallway. Wait, Frey halted, turning back as she stood there, breathless. Isuna's thoughts spiraled as she questioned him. her voice laced with urgency. Why had he become a teacher? Was it because of Naru's words, telling him he should teach someday? If that were the case, a quiet school in the countryside would have been enough. But he had deliberately chosen a noble academy, one directly connected to the hero Lux, the enemy he once fought against. Was it all just a means to get closer to them? Was teaching merely a tool for revenge? As soon as the words left her lips, she felt shocked at her accusations. Frey remained still, his expression unreadable. Slowly, he closed his eyes, exhaling before opening them again. His unwavering gaze met hers as he confirmed that everything she had said was right. Asuna froze, her breath catching as Frey's response sank in. She had asked the question hoping for denial, for reassurance that her suspicions were wrong. But his answer shattered that hope. It was clear and unwavering affirmation. At that moment, a storm of emotions surged through her: confusion, disbelief, frustration, and something deeper she couldn't quite name. Asuna's expression was filled with concern as her heart pounded. Frey, a man burdened by past trauma and twisted by his experiences, used his wounds and his enemies' accomplishments as lessons. The thought unsettled her. Maybe revenge was part of his motivation, but was that something to feel guilty about? She descended the stairs, studying him closely. He looked as if he was blaming himself, weighed down by his words. Stepping closer, she held her ground, unwavering. Whatever his reasons, as long as he fulfilled his role as a teacher, that was what truly mattered. She had promised him that much. Frey admitted to himself that he had considered resigning to take responsibility for attacking Asuna. However, stepping away so quickly would have been even more irresponsible. Asuna was momentarily stunned as Frey continued speaking, explaining that, at the very least, he intended to stay until the exams were over. He had assumed she wanted nothing to do with his guidance. As she walked away, she suddenly turned back to him, acknowledging his impressive abilities and admitting that she had used him for the sake of the exam. Frey smiled to himself. His only wish was for her to live without regrets. Meanwhile, Asuna whispered a quiet thought, reflecting on how nice it was to see her mother getting along so well with her father. It was something she had always considered good. Breaking the silence, she brought up an unexpected topic, mentioning the dog she had seen in Frey's memories. She pointed out how it resembled her in some way. Frey, caught off guard, gave her a puzzled look and asked what she meant by that. Asuna pointed out that the dog in his memories had acknowledged his strength and submitted to him, drawing a parallel that only she seemed to understand. Then, with a serious look, she reminded him of his promise to stay and insisted he keep it. A faint blush spread across her cheeks as a single thought echoed in her mind: darling. Meanwhile, Thea sat alone, leisurely eating a massive burger. It had been a while since she'd had a solo lunch, and with her classes not starting until the afternoon, she could finally take her time. However, San's recent comment lingered in her mind, making her sigh. The thought was almost as exhausting as the struggle walking was difficult. On a typical morning in the classroom, Asuna lunged at Frey with hearts practically shining in her eyes, but he effortlessly dodged her advance. Nearby, her sisters Anna, San, Thea, and Fem watched the scene unfold. San tilted her head, noting how Asuna had been sparring with Frey daily and expressing her desire to challenge him. Thea, however, observed that calling it sparring seemed a bit generous. It looked more like Asuna was trying to cling to him. Anna remained quiet momentarily before finally speaking. She wondered whether Asuna had eaten something strange since she had been acting oddly lately. Thea, caught off guard by Anna's bluntness, reacted with shock. Asuna, undeterred, huffed in response. To her, the real oddity wasn't her current behavior, it was how she had been up until now. A bright smile spread across her face as she declared, filled with newfound conviction, that true love had finally opened her eyes. Frey stood there, speechless, watching Asuna with confusion and disbelief. There was no doubt about it, she was acting strange. His mind drifted back to the moment on the stairs when she had looked at him with that unexpected blush, her words still lingering in his thoughts. Make sure you keep your promise, darling. That memory alone sent a shiver down his spine. Meanwhile, deep cracks began to spread across the massive walls of the dam. The structure groaned under the pressure until, finally, the weakened barrier gave way. Water burst through the fractures, surging in a mighty torrent, flooding everything in its path. Asuna's emotions, which she had held back for so long, were now spilling over without restraint. Her voice rang through the room as she repeatedly called out, overflowing with excitement. Meanwhile, Frey looked visibly uncomfortable, shifting awkwardly under her relentless enthusiasm. Glancing down at his pocket watch, he noted the time: 9 am. He abruptly cut through the moment without hesitation, raising his voice to bring her back to reality. Asuna effortlessly jumped back onto Frey's desk, landing smoothly before settling into a seated position. With a playful smile, she glanced at her sisters and casually remarked about attending their beloved teacher's class. Frey let out a silent sigh of relief. At the very least, if she were willing to listen during class, she'd stay quiet hopefully. But then, Asuna's expression shifted into something more determined. She'd need to pass her exams if she wanted to stay by his side forever. A mischievous chuckle escaped her lips as she whispered her resolve to herself. Reno noticed Asuna's sudden change of heart and pointed out that even Frey seemed unsure of its reason. As they spoke in the hallway, she suggested that something must have triggered it and pressed Frey for an answer. Frey admitted that while he didn't fully understand the connection, the shift likely happened when Asuna saw his past. That moment had changed something in her. Before they could continue, approaching footsteps echoed through the hallway. Asuna walked toward them composedly, brushing off their conversation as if there was nothing to discuss. Asuna approached Frey, pointing a finger at him with a knowing expression. She understood he might be worried she would reveal his past to others, but that wasn't her intention. Sharing it would only trouble her sisters, and she had no desire to burden them with it. A soft smile formed on her face, her cheeks tinged with a faint blush. To her, his past was deeply personal, something she would protect. It was a secret she intended to keep safe in her heart. Frey acknowledged her sentiment, but Asuna was already lost in her thoughts. The idea of having a secret shared only between them sent a thrill through her, leaving her grinning to herself, wholly absorbed in the thought. Reno observed them from a distance, narrowing her eyes with suspicion. There was something off about Asuna. Before she could say anything, Asuna abruptly shouted, trying to brush off any doubts. Frey, noticing the shift in tone, grew concerned. Asuna, however, remained confident. As long as things unfolded as she envisioned, there was no problem. And if anything took an unexpected turn, she was ready to take full responsibility. Still uneasy, Frey could only watch, unsure of what she meant. Late at night, near the academy gate, a sense of unease lingered in the air. With exams approaching, the last thing anyone needed was another source of trouble. A quiet hope settled and maybe, just maybe, nothing more would go wrong. A shadowed figure stood by the gate, coughing, their presence unsettling in the dim light. Frey stood on the other side of the gate, slightly sweaty from his walk. What had started as a simple attempt to work off his breakfast had now turned into an unexpected encounter. His eyes fell on a lone figure leaning against the gate, a man coughing weakly. The stranger's voice broke the silence, casually asking to be let in. Frey narrowed his eyes, immediately wary. He had no idea who this man was, and letting him in based solely on his judgment was entirely out of the question. Yet, there was always the slim possibility that this was another unexpected acquaintance, much like Achel had been. Should he follow the same course of action as before? Maybe call for Rose or Reno. Frey hesitated, weighing his options as the night stretched on. Frey's words came out harsher than he intended, telling the man to leave. The moment he heard himself, he was taken aback. Why had he spoken like that? The stranger's expression shifted, clearly unimpressed by Frey's tone. Something off about him sent a warning through Frey's mind. Instinctively, he took a step back, reevaluating the situation. This wasn't just some random traveler, this man was dangerous. Unfazed, the stranger made it clear he wouldn't wait around for permission. He'd find his way in if the gate wasn't open. Frey, keeping his composure, turned slightly as he explained the futility of trying to climb over. The fence and walls weren't just ordinary barriers, they were reinforced with magic. Anyone attempting to scale them would be repelled instantly. The man leaned in close to the gate, his hand pressing against it only instead of stopping, it sank right through. Without hesitation, the rest of his body followed, slipping past the barrier effortlessly. Frey's eyes widened in shock. He hadn't broken the fence or forced his way through, he had phased through it. The man smirked, almost amused, as if this was nothing special. He had only done what Frey pointed out. The fence was the barrier. By matching his power to the magic woven into it, he had merged with the barrier and passed through. A regular iron fence would have been more of an obstacle. Frey stood frozen, unable to believe what he had just witnessed. This wasn't just a physical wall or a magical shield, it was a barrier in solid form. And this guy had walked through it like it was nothing. Frey's mind raced as he recalled what Rose had once told him about the gate. It was one of the finest barriers in the demon realm, crafted by an art master. The structure of the barrier constantly shifted, changing at random from moment to moment, making it impossible even for the barrier masters themselves to enter or exit without following the exact procedure. The teleportation that had brought Frey here was one such method proof of just how intricate and impenetrable this barrier was supposed to be. Frey's thoughts raced. Even with a simple, unchanging barrier, only a handful of people could slip through by synchronizing with it, and he wasn't one of them. But to pull off that feat with a barrier this advanced, that was on an entirely different level. Only one person came to mind. As the realization sank in, an image of Lux surfaced in his mind, his enemy, the hero. The man casually walked past Frey, offering a dismissive farewell as he moved forward. Without hesitation, Frey dashed ahead, positioning himself directly in the stranger's path. From the very beginning, the man had been suspicious. If there was even the slightest chance he was connected to Lux, that alone was reason enough to stop him. As Frey stood his ground, the man's expression darkened. His face shadowed as a quiet tension filled the air. Meanwhile, Asuna rushed through the palace halls, calling out for Reno. When she finally spotted her sweeping the floor, she wasted no time getting straight to the point. She wanted to remind Reno again whatever was going on between her and Frey. It wasn't something their parents needed to know just yet. She would tell them herself when the time was right. Reno, still focused on sweeping, casually admitted that she had already told Asuna's mother. Their mother had heard about Asuna's sudden change of heart daily. Asuna froze, completely taken aback. Her mind scrambled to process what she had just heard. Acting on her own, why would Reno do that? Before she could demand an explanation, a familiar buzzing sound filled the air. The mirror flickered to life, and Achel's voice calmly addressed Reno. Asuna froze. Wait, was that her mother? Her eyes widened as realization hit her. Then came Achel's familiar voice, casually acknowledging her. Asuna glanced at the mirror, finally processing what was happening. Oh, right. This was a magic communication tool. So much for keeping things quiet. Reno noticed the urgency in Achel's voice and wondered if something serious had happened. Looking flustered, Achel admitted that the Demon King had scolded her after discovering her recent visit to Asuna. Asuna's eyes widened in shock upon hearing the news. Achel continued, explaining that while she had been talking about Asuna and the others, the Demon King had abruptly stood up and, without hesitation, headed straight to their palace. The man coughed and glanced at Frey with an exasperated expression. Frustration was evident in his eyes as he questioned why he was being stopped to see his daughter. Though he had hired Frey, the situation felt unnecessarily troublesome. His irritation grew as he observed the young man before him. Something about him was eerily familiar. The resemblance to this guy's father was undeniable, making the whole encounter even more unsettling. Frey launched an attack, unaware that his opponent was none other than the Demon Lord himself. As he struck, he demanded to know where the man was headed. But as his magic landed, shock overtook him. His spells were passing straight through, completely ineffective. His mind raced for a solution. Recalling how the man had slipped through the barrier by synchronizing with its magic, Frey realized he was facing someone far beyond an ordinary foe. Still, he couldn't afford to back down. As a teacher employed by the Demon Lord, it was his duty to protect the academy and its students. Unbeknownst to him, the man he desperately tried to fight was not just any intruder, he was the one who had hired him. The Demon Lord himself, father of the students he swore to protect. The Demon Lord coughed, his expression unreadable as he stepped forward, making his intentions clear. He had business with his daughter. It wasn't a request, just a simple statement of fact. Frey, however, immediately went on guard. His mind raced, piecing things together. If the guy was here for his daughter, he was after the students. His instincts kicked in, and he positioned himself to block the way without hesitation. He wasn't going to let that happen. The Demon Lord hesitated briefly, seemingly caught off guard by the reaction. But the air around them shifted in an instant. A heavy, crushing aura erupted from him, shaking the ground beneath them. The overwhelming pressure sent a chill down Frey's spine. Crackles of energy filled the air, the sheer intensity making it clear that this wasn't just a casual encounter but a warning. Frey tightened his grip, magic forming in his hand as he analyzed the situation. The sheer force of the Demon Lord's presence wasn't just for show. This was pure, lethal intent. There was no doubt in his mind now this was the true nature of the being standing before him. Frey lunged forward, launching a physical strike at the Demon Lord, but something about this man unsettled him. The moment he laid eyes on him, an inexplicable irritation flared up inside him. Was it the same feeling he had when they first met? He couldn't tell if it was pure frustration from his ineffective attacks or the overwhelming sense of danger radiating from his opponent. Holding on to his magic aura, Frey's mind raced. There was something about the guy, his rough, almost reckless appearance that gnawed at him. But was that it? Or was there something deeper, something he had yet to understand? Frey unleashed another attack, his magic surging forward, only to pass through the Demon Lord again. The Demon Lord barely reacted, unimpressed by the repetition. The flames were more intense this time, but it made no difference. As before, he synchronized with the magic, slipping through it effortlessly. But then something unexpected. A sharp, sudden chill cut through the heat. Hidden within the fire, shards of ice burst forth, catching the Demon Lord off guard. The shift in temperature and the unexpected nature of the attack startled him. Ice had emerged from within the blazing wall of fire, a trick he hadn't anticipated. Frey's expression darkened, his focus razor sharp as he analyzed his opponent. He had figured it out, but the guy wasn't just nullifying magic. He was using the same principle as slipping through a barrier, synchronizing his magic with the energy of an attack to phase right through it. With that in mind, Frey deliberately cast another fire spell, allowing his opponent to sync with it. But hidden within the flames, waiting for the perfect moment, was a second spell, a completely different magic structure designed to bypass that trick. Before the guy could react, the ice spell struck. Caught off guard, he had no time to adjust. The freezing magic spread across his body in an instant, encasing him in a massive block of ice. Shock flickered across his face, but it was too late. Frey's hand trembled as she clenched her fist, her body tense from the fight. The thought crossed her mind, if this guy had allies lurking nearby, she couldn't afford to waste more time. She needed to get back to the castle, back to everyone, before things escalated further. A sharp, cracking noise sent a chill down her spine just as she turned. Her face darkened, dread creeping in as she realized what was happening. The ice her carefully planned attack was breaking apart. With an almost amused tone, the Demon Lord's voice cut through the air as the ice shattered completely, freeing him without a scratch. He rolled his shoulders as if shaking off the cold, a grin spreading across his face. He had humored her and played along just for fun. But now, with that same unsettling smile, he made it clear Frey's strength and training weren't nearly enough. Frey replayed the guy's words in her mind. He had only tried her for fun. It wasn't an empty bluff. The realization hit hard. This man had effortlessly synchronized with a barrier that constantly shifted and changed every moment. That alone was an incredible feat. He had gambled everything on the chance that he wouldn't be able to react to a surprise attack in time. But even that wasn't enough. He was on a completely different level, far beyond what she had anticipated. Frey stood there, his body trembling, breathing heavily as he clutched his other hand. Despite the exhaustion, a small smile formed on his face. No matter who this man was, he wouldn't back down. Then, his expression shifted, turning serious. With a deep breath, he forced himself to remain composed and acknowledged his mistake sincerely. Moments later, Asuna arrived at the scene with an unexpected sight, the Demon King sitting on the ground while Frey stood nearby. Her eyes widened in shock as she took in the bizarre scene. She had been frantically searching for her father, only to stumble upon Frey being overpowered. The sight of her father casually sitting on Frey's head caught her off guard the most. Frey, clearly frustrated, struggled underneath him, his voice rising in protest as he demanded to be freed from the ridiculous situation. Frey could hardly believe it. He had been fighting the Demon Lord all along. The realization left him speechless. He had never even considered the possibility. The Demon Lord, however, seemed entirely unfazed. There was no hostility, just a calm acceptance of the situation. It was clear that both sides had misunderstood each other. But in the end, what mattered was Frey's resolve. He had fought with everything to protect the Demon Lord's daughters, the castle, and everyone within it. For that, there was no reason for blame. Frey couldn't help but acknowledge the sheer presence of the Demon Lord. It wasn't just his overwhelming power, but also his composed and commanding nature. He was meant to stand above all others. And yet, despite that, something about him was unbearably irritating. Frey couldn't put his finger on it, but the feeling gnawed at him. Was it just one of those cases where someone rubs you the wrong way for no reason? He sighed internally. Letting that irritation show through his expression or actions would be unacceptable. He couldn't afford to let personal feelings cloud his professionalism as a teacher. The Demon Lord stepped closer to Frey, studying him with a knowing look before casually questioning if there was any resentment between them. Frey instinctively stiffened, his reaction immediate and defensive. His denial came out too quickly, almost as if he was trying to convince himself as much as the Demon Lord. Instead of pressing further, the Demon Lord brushed it off with a shrug as if it were of no consequence. But then, with a thoughtful expression, he mused aloud about something running thick in Frey's bloodline, his father. Frey froze, his breath catching at the unexpected remark. His mind raced, trying to process what he had just heard. The realization hit him like a jolt. The Demon Lord knew his father. Frey's thoughts spiraled as he recalled the histories surrounding his father executed for betraying the nation, accused of colluding with the demon realm. Regardless of whether the accusations were true, there was no denying that his father had dealings with demons. But to think those ties extended to the Demon Lord himself, doubt crept into his mind. Had his father betrayed the nation, or was there more to the story than he had ever known? Asuna stepped forward, her voice firm as she urged her father to share everything he knew about Frey's father. Frey, taken aback, glanced at her before turning to the Demon Lord with newfound determination, asking for the truth. The Demon Lord paused, considering the request before finally agreeing. Both Frey and Asuna were caught off guard by his unexpected willingness. However, there was a catch. With a serious expression, the Demon Lord laid down his condition. Every one of his 5 daughters had to pass the upcoming exam in a month. Only if that requirement was met would he reveal the truth about Frey's father. Offering it as a reward, Asuna frowned, protesting that her father was being too harsh. But before she could say more, Frey shook his head, surprising her. Instead of complaining, he expressed his gratitude, acknowledging that the Demon Lord was at least giving them a chance. Passing the exam was already his goal, so the condition didn't change anything for him, though the added stakes made things more interesting. Taking a step forward, Frey flashed a bright smile, yet his words carried the same irritation he had initially felt. No matter how much he tried, he couldn't bring himself to like the Demon Lord. Hearing that, the Demon Lord burst into laughter, echoing through the hall. Amused, he looked at Frey and remarked that he was just like his father. Frey casually remarked that they had spent quite some time chatting at the gate and suggested heading inside the castle for tea. He even offered to call the girls over, making it a proper gathering. However, the Demon Lord quickly declined, waving off the idea. He mentioned how he had repeatedly told a child not to meet with their daughters, and now it was getting difficult to keep things consistent. His visit today wasn't meant for a casual get-together, it was strictly business, and he had come for just one person. Hearing that, as soon as expression shifted, a sense of unease crept over her as she processed his words, a flicker of fear flashing in her eyes. As soon as thoughts raced so he had finally come, she hoped to keep things vague to avoid confronting the situation head-on. Somehow, she needed to cover up the fact that she and Darling were in love. The Demon King, unfazed, started walking toward the castle, stating that he was there to meet with someone. Isuna froze, completely caught off guard. He hadn't come to see her. Turning back toward her, the Demon King apologized casually, ruffling her hair as if she were still a child. He told her he was glad to see her and wished her luck on her exams, adding one last request not to tell her other sisters. Isuna's thoughts raced her mother hadn't told her father about her and, Darling, had she. Then what exactly was the Demon King's business in the castle? Meanwhile, the Demon King casually mentioned that he could roughly sense everyone's location through magic. He assured them he wouldn't take long and would be on his way soon. Before heading inside, he added a final note: the information reward was just a bonus. The usual reward was separate, and they were free to ask if there was anything else they wanted. Isuna's expression grew troubled as she realized she might have done something terrible to her father. She had heard about his arrival and searched all over the place, knowing he could appear anywhere in the castle using teleportation magic. In her search, she told one of her sisters about their father's arrival, hoping to get help finding him. But since she had come here secretly, she would have to make sure that her sister kept quiet about it later. Still, the fact that their father had come specifically to see one of his daughters in secret left her uneasy. Which one of her 4 remaining sisters could it be? The Demon King stood in the palace, glancing at the figure before him. He let out a small sigh and spoke, his voice calm but firm. It seemed she had already known about his arrival. He had expected surprise, maybe even joy, but none of that. Instead, there was only quiet acknowledgement. Ichel had already informed him about the situation, so there was no need for further explanation. His gaze settled on her as he continued, addressing her directly. Rose. Anna curiously turned to Isuna, asking when Rose had started working as a maid. She wasn't sure about the exact period, but wanted to know more. Isuna thought momentarily before explaining that Rose had always been a maid assigned to their father. However, she estimated that it had been about 10 years ago. San added that she first met Rose when she visited their father's castle, recalling the memory. Fia, reminiscing, mentioned that Rose had been around the same age as Fem is now back then. Even at that time, she had an undeniable coolness about her. Meanwhile, Fem, absorbed in a book, casually stated that their father had brought Rose to the castle. Beyond that, no one knew what had happened to her before then. Frey considered the possibility for a moment, but the idea of Rose being a secret child of the Demon King seemed unlikely. There was no clear evidence to support such a claim. Meanwhile, Reno, blushing slightly, reacted strongly to the mention of Rose. Without hesitation, she declared that Rose was her beloved, speaking with evident admiration and affection. What did the silent maid discuss with the Demon King? The next day, Frey stood alongside Rose in the playground, holding a crate while the 5 sisters observed. The day's lessons covered a broad range of weapon techniques, magic, and physical training, ensuring a well-rounded student curriculum. After ensuring everything was in order, Rose turned to leave. She excused herself with her usual quiet composure, departing without unnecessary words. Frey acknowledged her help with a brief thanks, watching as she walked away. His mind lingered on their earlier conversation following the Demon King's visit. Rose had mentioned that the Demon King had explicitly come to see her. Yet, the Demon King had stated he was there to see his daughter. Frey found himself stuck on that detail. Did he mean daughter as in a young woman? Thought left him puzzled. On the day the Demon King met Rose, their conversation carried the weight of years unspoken. Rose, ever composed, made her stance clear: she was not his daughter. Unfazed by her cold demeanor, the Demon King responded with his usual easygoing nature. While he acknowledged that she was only his adopted daughter, in his heart, he had always considered her his real one. But Rose had spent over a decade rejecting the very idea of adoption. She expressed gratitude for the kindness he had shown her when she had no one else, but she firmly believed that serving as a maid suited her far more than a noble lady. Despite that, she had heard about his visit after she had collapsed and took a moment to thank him sincerely. The Demon King only laughed, brushing it off as nothing of concern. However, Rose found herself musing over another detail Asuna had yet to hear about her collapse from a shell. Shifting the topic, the Demon King mentioned an unexpected outcome of his visit. Because of the incident, he had managed to strike an interesting bet with the kid. Rose, curious, questioned who he meant. When the Demon King confirmed he was referring to Frey, she could only assume what kind of challenge had been set. The Demon King seemed amused by it all, confident that Frey would put even more effort into his lessons from now on. Meanwhile, in the playground, Asuna stood with a wooden sword, her energy radiating as she motivated everyone around her. She called out, urging them to push themselves harder. Sen needed to take magic practice more seriously, and Femme had to manage her stamina better. Frey observed Asuna with a raised brow, noticing the fire in her eyes. It was unusual to see her this fired up, and he couldn't help but wonder what had sparked this sudden intensity in her training. Asuna, still full of energy, responded with determination, explaining that if they didn't all pass, they wouldn't get any information about Frey's father. Frey acknowledged it, recalling their conversation with the Demon King, but pointed out that his approach to teaching wouldn't change because of it. More importantly, he noted that Asuna was usually much gentler with her sisters. He teased her, telling her not to lose her temper for his sake. It would ruin her good image as a caring sister. Hearing this, Asuna's face turned red. She was caught off guard by the comment. She hesitated momentarily before letting out an awkward chuckle, clearly flustered. Frey turned his attention elsewhere, but his amusement faded as he spotted Fia struggling in the training ground. She was trying to balance a bow and a sword while attempting to channel magic, her movements clumsy and uncoordinated. Before she could adequately steady herself, she tripped and fell, her weapons clattering to the ground. Frey observed Fia with concern, realizing that today's lessons were tailored for her. He was still unsure what area she should focus on improving. If he had singled her out and made her try different things on her own, it would have been too obvious and might have hurt her feelings. So, instead, he had turned it into a group lesson to make it feel more natural. As he stood there thinking, Fia, who had been fumbling with a rope, continued her clumsy attempts at practice. Lost in thought, Frey was pulled back to reality when he heard a small voice call out. Looking up, he saw Fia standing there, completely tangled in the rope, having somehow managed to tie multiple knots around her body. She looked at him helplessly, her wide eyes pleading for assistance. Fia sat on the floor, looking dejected as she struggled with her tangled ropes. Asuna quickly rushed to her side, urging her not to lose strength. Fia lowered her head with a sad expression, murmuring about how she felt inadequate. She admitted that San was better than her in martial arts, and even though she used to be confident in magic, Femme had now surpassed her. Asuna, offering a reassuring smile, reminded her that she, too, was searching for something at which she could excel again. She encouraged Fia, suggesting they work hard together to find their strengths. Watching the exchange, Anna chimed in nonchalantly, stating that if someone wasn't outstanding in any particular area, they should improve everything equally. With a smug tone, she added that she had never worried about such things because she was naturally good at everything. Asuna's expression immediately darkened. Annoyed, she snapped at Anna to shut up. Reno's voice rang out from a distance, drawing everyone's attention as he moved closer. His expression was confident as he pointed out what he believed to be Asuna's most notable strength, much to her shock and embarrassment. Asuna's face flushed with frustration as she reacted immediately, clearly flustered by his remark. Unbothered by her reaction, Reno continued with a smug look, insisting that she possessed a natural charm capable of captivating the masses. Then, without hesitation, he turned toward Frey, seeking validation. Frey was entirely caught off guard, tensed up at the unexpected involvement. His expression shifted from surprise to discomfort as he quickly tried to distance himself from the conversation, unwilling to be dragged into the situation. Asuna's expression held an expectant look as she waited for Frey's response. After a brief moment of hesitation, Frey carefully considered his words. Speaking in general terms, he acknowledged that people could be charmed by such things. He explained that such traits could even serve as a powerful weapon for a succubus, whose abilities relied on mental magic. However, he quickly pointed out that bringing up such a topic while a student was worried about their abilities would be insincere. At his words, Asuna's expression shifted into a teasing smile as she leaned in slightly, posing a playful question about whether Frey himself was charmed by her. In an instant, Frey's face paled, caught completely off guard by the unexpected turn in the conversation. He hurriedly denied the implication, and his response came out almost too quickly. Seeing his reaction, Asuna's teasing demeanor faded into visible disappointment as she let out a frustrated sigh, muttering her dissatisfaction under her breath. Frey sat at his desk, pen in hand, carefully writing his thoughts. He noted that, in the end, Asuna had chosen to develop her succubus powers. As for Fia's situation, there had been no real breakthrough that day either. A sigh escaped him as he stared at the unfinished letter, the weight of his concerns pressing down on him. A sudden knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Looking up, he acknowledged the visitor, and soon, the door opened to reveal Rose. She stepped inside, carrying a small tray. Without hesitation, she informed him that she had brought a late-night snack. Frey thanked her as she set it down, but her observant gaze lingered on him. She casually remarked on how troubled he seemed. Frey, still holding his coffee, hesitated before giving a slight nod. He took a slow sip, letting the warmth settle him, but his mind remained occupied. Failing to identify a student's hidden talent felt like a failure on his part, and that wasn't something a teacher should discuss so quickly with others, at least not without the student's consent. While sipping his coffee and casually snacking, Frey glanced over at Rose and brought up the topic of the Demon King's visit. He had been wondering what business the Demon King had with her. Rose responded calmly, revealing she was one of the Demon King's mistresses. A bit surprised, Frey continued his observation, jokingly suggesting that the Demon King's visit had been an uncomplicated rendezvous with his mistress. He reached for another snack, telling her to stop with such boring jokes. However, Rose seemed undeterred and replied with curiosity, questioning why Frey considered it a joke. Frey, not missing a beat, explained his thoughts while chewing his snack. He said that if the Demon King were to take an interest in a new woman, he wouldn't make her a mistress, but would officially make her his sixth wife instead. He paused to swallow, then added that, more importantly, making such jokes could be dangerous in a castle where the Demon King's daughters also resided. He warned that if the daughters overheard such comments, they would be shocked, and he didn't want to risk any more strange dreams caused by awkward situations. Rose approached Frey, asking about the strange dreams he had mentioned. Frey was caught off guard and fumbled for a response, feeling flustered. He quickly waved it off, saying it was nothing and that he had work to do. Rose nodded, about to leave, but paused to mention the real reason for the Demon King's visit. Still focused on his work, Frey shrugged it off, assuming it was confidential. Rose closed her eyes briefly and left, leaving Frey to continue his tasks. In the scene where the Demon King and Rose are talking, the Demon King gets straight to the point, addressing the matter of Rose's sudden collapse. He asked if her memories had returned. Rose responded with a simple no, but added that she had a strange dream in which an unknown body spoke to her, saying something she couldn't quite remember. Frey couldn't shake off the strange dream he had. He wondered why it happened, as he'd never experienced anything like it. He didn't think he had any unique feelings for Rose or anyone else, not like that. He'd always imagined a life where he'd grow up with someone, building a bond and eventually falling in love. That was the kind of life he dreamed of. If it were something like that, he'd understand. But the girl he wanted is Naru, his childhood friend. The next day, Frey looked at Rose and couldn't help but comment on her maid outfit, wondering if she felt uncomfortable. Rose, however, seemed unbothered, explaining that it was her usual attire. After a moment of consideration, Frey shrugged it off, deciding that if she was okay with it, it was fine. On a hot day, Reno was running along the beach, his energy matched by the playful atmosphere of the scene. Frey and Rose stood off to the side, observing San and Asuna enjoying playing on the beach. Frey glanced at Rose, reflecting on the unexpected vacation. He had suggested a trip as a change of pace, but the villa on a remote island was more than he had anticipated. Frey couldn't help but reflect on the journey. Usually, the time spent traveling was part of the fun, but with limited time to spare, teleportation magic had been a lifesaver. It was quick and efficient, allowing them to bypass the usual travel inconveniences. Still, Frey had a lingering thought. There was one minor issue that needed attention. His eyes narrowed slightly, processing the reality of their situation. He had hoped for a change of pace, but now that they were here, he realized that some things had already been decided for them. Frey let out a long yawn, sipping his drink as he tried to shake off his exhaustion. Just as he was about to relax, Rose casually asked if he'd had another one of those strange dreams. Startled, Frey immediately spit out his drink, not expecting the question. He looked at her, clearly flustered and confused by her words. Rose, unfazed, noted that he seemed sleep-deprived as if it were just a casual observation. What was weighing on Frey, though, were the strange dreams he had been having, dreams involving Rose in intimate, embarrassing scenarios. Frey reflected on his odd dream and glanced at Rose. Curious about his experience, she asked if he often had unusual dreams. Rose shared that she had once dreamed of being overwhelmed by a horde of demon lords and another time of spending time alone with someone important to her. Frey, intrigued by her response, nodded thoughtfully. But when Rose quickly clarified that the dream wasn't about him, he acknowledged it. She then asked, somewhat teasingly, if Frey had anyone important to him. Frey, caught off guard by the question, explained that his students were important to him, although important might vary depending on the person. He quickly dismissed any more profound thoughts, reflecting that he nearly mentioned someone else Naru, but it didn't seem like the right moment for such a personal topic. Rose pondered, not fully understanding Frey's internal struggle but sensing something unspoken. Isuna, excited in her bathing suit, suddenly bursts in, holding a bottle of oil. She calls Frey, asking him to help her apply for it. Frey, startled by her sudden appearance, quickly runs off, shouting that he is out. Isuna, undeterred, chases after him, calling for him to wait. However, she pauses, standing. Meanwhile, Frey, having escaped to the woods, breathed a sigh of relief. His heart was still racing when he noticed someone lying on the ground nearby. Upon closer inspection, he saw it was Fia, looking lost in thought as she lay there, unaware of his approach. Frey approached Fia gently, asking if she wasn't going to swim. Fia was startled, her eyes wide with surprise as she heard his voice, and she quickly responded, calling him Sensei. San, who had been nearby, noticed the situation and spoke up. She mentioned she had planned to surprise Fia, but was caught off guard when Frey showed up instead. Fia, looking down, responded quietly, expressing her doubt about being able to swim. She mentioned her struggles, feeling unsteady even on land, and feared she might drown if she tried. San's eyes widened in concern, her expression filled with panic. She rushed to Fia, crying out her name in distress, and anxiously asked if her earlier joke had hurt Fia that much. Fia, visibly upset, remained quiet, unsure of how to respond to the worry and care around her. Frey calmly reassured Fia, telling her that San hadn't meant any harm and asking for forgiveness. Fia, however, smiled and nonchalantly agreed, almost as if it was a given. She then explained, with a hint of quiet acceptance, that walking was genuinely difficult for her. Both Frey and San stood there, staring at Fia in stunned silence. The weight of her words hung in the air, leaving them speechless as they processed her revelation. Still processing Fia's words, Frey quietly apologized and asked if she could explain more in detail. Fia, seeming to understand his confusion, agreed to elaborate. Frey's mind raced as she spoke, trying to understand what she was saying. Her story was strange and unsettling. Was there something deeper beneath the surface? Could it be what he was thinking? Frey's mind swirled with questions because the pieces weren't fitting together. As he was lost in his thoughts, he suddenly heard a familiar voice calling out. It was Isuna, shouting for him. Without thinking, Frey quickly turned and ran off, with Isuna seemingly determined to catch up with him. Anna, enjoying the warmth of the beach, noticed Isuna sprinting across the sand, chasing after Frey. With a casual glance, she observed Isuna's swift movements and couldn't help but think how impressive it was that she could dash on such an uneven surface. Anna continued watching them briefly before focusing on the ocean view ahead. Meanwhile, Fia asked San if she was going to swim. Looking concerned, San explained that she was tired of swimming and considered doing something else, like playing in the sand. She smiled and encouraged Fia, reminding her there were many other fun activities even if she couldn't swim. However, Fia's mood didn't lighten. She stood there, feeling conflicted and unhappy. Despite her words, it wasn't just about the swimming. She reflected on how Isuna had quickly found something she was good at while Fia struggled to feel the same. A sense of unfairness weighed on her heart, and she couldn't help but feel frustrated with herself. San smiled and suggested that Fia try Isuna's unique skills. Fia was taken aback by the suggestion, her thoughts racing. She couldn't help but ask, her voice concerned whether San even understood a succubus's abilities. San, with a lighthearted expression, admitted that she wasn't entirely sure, but jokingly added that having big boobs was probably significant. Then, she looked at Fia and remarked that her chest was more critical than Isuna's. Fia's face turned bright red, and she let out a shocked squeal, overwhelmed by San's sudden comment. San noticed Frey in the distance and excitedly pointed him out to Fia. When Fia turned to look, Frey approached them and casually spoke to Fia, asking if they could meet alone when night fell. Fia was taken aback, her face registering complete surprise and confusion at the unexpected request. She stood still, unsure how to respond. When night came, everyone enjoyed a barbecue by the seaside. Meanwhile, Fia walked alone through the hallways of the villa. Her thoughts were heavy as she reflected on Isuna's words and how she could try something similar. Though she didn't possess the abilities of a succubus, perhaps there was still a way for her to be desired, whatever form that could take. She paused in front of the door to the living room, her hand on the handle, uncertain but determined to take the next step. The door creaked open. When Fia opened the door, she saw Frey and Reno standing inside, turning toward her as they called her name. Fia was taken aback and asked why Reno was there. Feeling awkward, Frey explained that, considering her species, he had thought she might perform better at night. The idea had come to him suddenly, but then he realized that having private lessons at night might not be appropriate. So, he had asked Reno to join them. Frey looked apologetic, acknowledging that he hadn't considered her feelings due to his tiredness and expressing his regret. Fia, overwhelmed with embarrassment, blushed and quickly ran away. Confused and unsure of what had just happened, Frey stood still for a moment, trying to understand. Fia's thoughts raced. Had Frey been thinking about her that way? Her self-doubt clouded her mind, and she decided she needed to leave. She quickly opened the door in her flustered state, ready to use her teleportation magic to return to the castle. The unexpected sound made her freeze, startled by the interruption. Reno and Frey, realizing she was about to leave, hurried towards her, catching up as she stood there, still processing her emotions. Frey and Reno recalled Rose's warning about the malfunctioning teleportation tool. Rose told them there was a risk that the tool might not connect to the intended destination, and she advised them against using it until it had been appropriately adjusted. Despite the caution, the group found themselves teleported to an unknown location. Reno groaned as they stumbled upon arrival, and Frey quickly checked on them. As he surveyed the surroundings, a sinking feeling grew in him. It was unmistakable, the human world. The teleportation had gone wrong, leaving them in an unexpected and uncertain place. When news of the accident reached them, the sisters quickly gathered, concern evident in their expressions. The revelation that Fia had ended up in the human world was alarming, and the confirmation came when Rose received a message from Reno. Anna considered the situation, recalling recent reports of malfunctioning teleportation magic devices. If that was the cause, it meant the issue had been ongoing. Rose acknowledged the problem and pointed out that they would need to adjust the device before attempting a proper rescue. Without those adjustments, their efforts would be futile. Taking responsibility for the task, Rose reassured the others, urging them to continue enjoying their vacation while she handled the necessary preparations. Sam couldn't help but feel uneasy despite Rose's reassurance. The thought of ending up in another world was serious, and no matter how they looked at it, the situation was far from normal. As she let out her thoughts, the mood in the room shifted. The sisters exchanged worried glances, their expressions growing tense. Noticing their reaction, Sen paused, sensing that something was off. Asuna calmly pointed out that the human world wasn't exactly another world, though Sen seemed confused by the clarification. She went on to explain that the terms human world and demon world were simply ways to distinguish the two territories rather than separate realms entirely. Even so, she acknowledged San's concerns. Being in human territory was no small matter, it was practically enemy land. In some ways, it could even be more dangerous than ending up in an unknown world. The risks were undeniable, especially given the recent warnings about teleportation safety. Fia looked worried, troubled by the thought of how such an accident had happened. Nearby, Reno informed Frey that Rose had taken responsibility for adjusting the magic device. Hearing this, Frey sighed in relief, grateful they had at least been able to communicate using magic. As Fia reflected on the situation, a realization struck her. Rose and Frey had warned them about the risks before, hadn't they? The magic device had even been sealed off as a precaution, but in her frustration and sadness, she hadn't paid proper attention. A wave of guilt settled over her. Had her carelessness contributed to this mess? Frey walked toward Fia, calling her name, causing Fia to flinch in surprise. Frey's face was guilty as she lowered her gaze and apologized. Fia blinked, puzzled by the sudden apology. Frey admitted that she had been too caught up in her idea, turning what was meant to be a memorable trip into a lesson. Because of that, Fia had ended up trying to return home despite knowing the magic device was malfunctioning. In Frey's mind, the accident was entirely her fault. Fia, feeling a mix of shyness and concern, quickly denied it, insisting that wasn't the case. But before she could explain further, Frey hesitated and asked if Fia had even paid proper attention to the warnings. Fia let out a nervous laugh, unable to deny it. Frey apologized to Fia once again, his expression filled with guilt. Still puzzled, Fia couldn't understand why he took so much responsibility for what had happened. Frey admitted that simply giving a warning wasn't enough. He should have ensured everyone listened and taken extra precautions to secure the magic device. If he had done more, maybe the accident could have been prevented. The blame, in his eyes, was entirely his to bear. Fia, feeling overwhelmed, urged him to stop. Hearing Frey blame himself so much only made her feel even more pathetic. Wanting to change the subject, she mentioned the idea he had mentioned earlier. Frey hesitated for a moment before realizing what she meant. It was the theory he had come up with that Fia's species might be able to show greater strength at night. Reno nodded in agreement, adding that Frey had also made sure to have him present in the room to prevent misunderstandings about the nighttime lessons. Fia, however, shrugged off the idea, stating that her physical abilities didn't increase at night. Frey considered this momentarily, recalling how Fia had performed the same even under the bright sunlight at the beach. It didn't seem like her strength fluctuated based on the time of day. Fia thought for a moment before mentioning that her mother was a bit different in that regard. However, since she only carried half of her mother's blood, She wasn't sure how much of that ability had been passed down to her. Fia was a vampire, a ruler of the night, a race that dominated the battlefield with their overwhelming power. Reno wrapped his arms around her in a reassuring hug, confidently stating that as part of one of the strongest races, Fia must have some kind of ability suited for combat. There was no way she wouldn't. Meanwhile, Frey remained deep in thought. His mind wasn't just on Fia's potential battlefield abilities, there was also another idea he had been considering, one that could change everything. Frey turned to Fia and Reno, deciding to set aside his thoughts. Their top priority was getting back to the castle safely. For the moment, they needed to focus on finding a place to rest and settle down. Still, there was another concern: if people discovered that they were demons, it could lead to trouble. Reno's cat ears and tail, along with Fia's pointed ears, made it obvious they weren't human. Frey considered their options. He should find a robe to help them blend in better. As he mulled over the idea, Reno chuckled, a mischievous glint in his eyes. Fia suddenly gasped, reaching up to touch her ears. She couldn't see them herself, but they didn't feel pointy anymore. Was this normal? She wasn't sure, but at least it seemed fine for now. Reno, looking pleased, chimed in with a grin, claiming that he no longer had cat ears or a tail. Curious, Fia pointed to her teeth, noting that even her fangs seemed different. Frey observed them, his mind racing. Could this be transformation magic? Frey admitted that communication magic and Reno's presence had been a huge help, as those weren't his strengths. Fia's expression fell, and she whispered to herself, feeling useless in comparison. Frey led Fia and Reno forward, deciding their next step. They prioritized finding an inn since restoring the teleportation system would take 2 or 3 days. He glanced ahead, thinking about Rose. She was handling the adjustments, but he couldn't help but worry, was she pushing herself too hard? Back in the villa, Isuna suggested making a late-night snack for Rose, thinking it might help her while she worked. San acknowledged that Rose was the only one capable of adjusting magical tools, making her workload unavoidable. Fem agreed, saying that helping in any way they could was a good idea. Isuna think if they divided the household chores starting tomorrow, Rose will be able to focus more on her work. She then turned to Anna, requesting to say something useful. But Anna turned around and suggested she will leave the rest to them, announcing that she will be going to bed. Annoyed, she called after her, unwilling to let her slip away so easily. Isuna grabbed Anna and shook her in frustration, but Anna only laughed, acting as if it didn't concern her. She brushed off the idea of cooking, claiming it wasn't a king's job and admitting she couldn't cook anyway. Turning the argument back on Isuna, she suggested that if it was such a great idea, Isuna should do it herself. Isuna hesitated before admitting that while it made sense, cooking wasn't exactly straightforward. Anna caught on quickly, narrowing her eyes and realizing that Isuna couldn't cook either. Annoyed, Isuna admitted it outright, frustrated with herself. Looking for other options, San turned to Fem, but Fem shook her head, making it clear she wasn't any better. With no one else left, San sighed, raising her hand and deciding to do the task herself. Fem glanced at San with doubt, wondering if she could cook. Unfazed, Sen recalled the times she and her mother went camping in the garden and the forest, where cooking for days had become second nature to her. Anna, yawning, casually pointed out that since they had all lived with their mothers until recently, they still didn't know much about each other. Without a second thought, she announced she was going to bed. Isuna, watching her leave so effortlessly, looked visibly irritated. Fem offered to help with the cooking, asking San to teach her. Isuna, on the other hand, hesitated before deciding to set the table instead. In her mind, she silently apologized to San, admitting she was completely hopeless at cooking. On the other side, the man shook his head, making it clear that the amount wasn't enough. Frey's expression tensed with worry. He attempted to book 2 rooms at the inn for 3 days, but the innkeeper glanced at his money and dismissed the request, stating that even a single room was out of reach with what he had on hand. Frey silently assessed the situation. His current salary was paid in kind, meaning his only money was whatever had been in his wallet before starting this job. In hindsight, having his purse with him was a minor stroke of luck. Frey pleaded with the innkeeper, promising to pay once he contacted his comrades. The innkeeper remained skeptical, questioning why he should trust that. In response, Frey placed a watch on the table as collateral, insisting it was more than enough to cover the lodging costs. However, he hesitated, unsure if it would be accepted. The innkeeper examined the watch and shook his head. The item was far too high class, cashing it in would be more trouble than it was worth. Reno and Fia looked pitiful, their expressions only adding to the weight of the situation. The innkeeper observed them for a moment before turning his attention back to Frey. Without a word, he gestured for Frey to come closer, then sat at a table and opened a wooden board. Frey immediately recognized it. Chess. The innkeeper smirked, explaining that chess had recently become a trend in town, but this wasn't just any chess. It was betting chess. Like many others, he had gotten hooked on it. If Frey won, they could stay for free. If he lost, they would have to leave. The challenge was set. Now, it was up to Frey to decide. Frey pulled out a chair and sat down, ready to take the risk. With nothing to lose, he committed to the game. The innkeeper set up the board, and the match began. The steady clack of chess pieces filled the room as they played, each move calculated and precise. Fia watched intently, following the tense back and forth between them. As time passed, the night settled over the inn. Then, a triumphant cheer echoed through the room. Frey had won. Fia looked impressed, acknowledging Frey's skill in chess. As expected, he excelled at this too. Frey, however, remained humble, admitting that he had only played occasionally, both as part of tactical training and for fun. Frey reminded them not to wander off independently and not to open the door for anyone who came by. Reno nodded in agreement while Fia casually mentioned that the shopkeeper was a good person. Frey was momentarily caught off guard by her words, but Fia smiled. He reflected on the situation as he entered his room and closed the door. He had already suspected the shopkeeper's goodwill from the unusual bet, and now, with the added gesture of offering them meals, it was clear the man had no ill intentions. But Fia's way of saying it felt oddly deliberate. Was there something more to it? Sitting down, Frey turned his attention to the watch he had used as collateral. It had been issued as part of his salary, but was it that valuable? The irony of struggling for small amounts of cash despite possessing something so expensive wasn't lost on him. Frey was jolted awake 2 days later by a sudden knock at his door. Still half asleep, he called out to ask who was there before opening the door. The sight that greeted him left him stunned. A young girl rushed forward and hugged him tightly. A child? Completely caught off guard, he questioned her identity. With teary eyes, the girl pleaded for help, her voice trembling. She looked as if she was about to cry. Seeing no other option, Frey agreed to hear her out, deciding to move somewhere else to talk. She nodded and followed him downstairs. But as they walked, her expression shifted. Her once teary eyes now held a fearless grin. Frey couldn't shake the uneasy feeling creeping up on him. Just what was this child's true intention? As the second day in town began, the three sat down for breakfast in the human world, uncertain if they would return safely to the demon world. Munching away, Reno casually mentioned that she had just spoken with Rose over the phone. The rescue team was expected to arrive that night. Frey acknowledged the news with a nod while Fia remained focused on her meal. Watching her eat, Frey felt relieved to see her doing better. However, something felt off. From the corner of his eye, he noticed the innkeeper standing against the wall, looking sweaty and tense. The heavy gaze sent a prickling sensation down his back. Fia, still eating, wondered aloud if the innkeeper had figured out that she and Reno were demons. Frey reassured her that the transformation magic was concealing their features properly. But as Fia glanced at the innkeeper again, confusion lingered. Looking down, she finally noticed the absurd amount of leftovers piled in front of her. Frey leaned in and whispered the inn covered their stay and their meals. Frey remained on high alert, knowing some could see through the disguise. He had to protect Reno and Fia. 1 hour earlier, outside the shop, away from prying ears, the child hesitated before revealing they knew Frey's companions were demons. Frey stiffened, but the child quickly assured him they wouldn't tell. That wasn't why Frey had called them here, though. The child had chosen this spot for privacy. Frey sighed, understanding their caution. Studying them, he calmly explained that not all demons were enemies and his companions meant no harm. Though still wary, the child nodded. Frey promised to keep their concerns private. Finally, the child's tense expression eased into a small smile. Frey reflected on the unexpected visitor in his room. There were things about her that felt off, but at least she didn't seem to have any ill intent. More pressing, however, was the state of his wallet. Glancing at the growing stack of empty plates in front of the girl, he sighed. Since they weren't at the shopkeeper's dining room, he'd have to cover the cost himself. He had told her she could order breakfast, but he would be seriously annoyed if this turned into outright freeloading. As Frey turned to the girl, he got straight to the point. She introduced herself as Margaret and quickly made her request she wanted him to retrieve her mother's keepsake. Before he could respond, Fia appeared, reminding him that it was time to return to their rooms. Aside from meals, they were staying in for the day. Frey acknowledged and walked her back, ensuring she was settled before closing the door behind her. As Frey walked to his room, he couldn't help but think about the kid. Margaret explained her situation. She lived in a nearby town and had gone out alone for the first time yesterday. While wandering, someone invited her to play chess. She kept winning with small bets on each round, earning some pocket money. But in the final match, the stakes skyrocketed to an unexpected amount. She lost and, with teary eyes, admitted that they took her mother's keepsake, a precious jewel. Determined to get it back, she returned to town and heard rumors of a strong chess player. Frey paused, realizing what she was implying. She wanted him to play chess against that person and win back her keepsake. Lying in bed, Frey let out a deep sigh. His thoughts drifted to Fia and Reno. His priority was getting them back safely. But then there were the others, a test, revenge. What was the right move? Margaret's request weighed on him. A keepsake from her parents, it was something he wanted to help with. But was this the right time? If his true identity was exposed, would he be blackmailed? Restless, he shifted in bed, the faint sounds of clattering filling the room. His mind raced, uncertainty creeping in. Then, finally, resolve settled in. Frey, Fia, and Reno left the inn, stepping onto the bustling streets. The town was lively, filled with merchants calling out their wares and townsfolk going about their day. Fia glanced at Frey, curious about the sudden outing. As they walked, Frey observed everything. The human world differed from their own, and understanding it better could prove helpful. From a distance, Margaret watched them closely, her gaze sharp and calculating, a sinister glint in her eye. Meanwhile, Frey, Fia, and Reno stepped into a noisy, crowded tavern filled with the scent of alcohol and the clamor of conversation. The lively atmosphere buzzed with laughter and shouting as patrons enjoyed their drinks. Fia glanced around, unsure. Frey, staying cautious, reminded them to stick close. As they moved through the crowd, a man approached, eyeing Fia with amusement, questioning their presence. But the man's confidence wavered when Frey turned his intense gaze on him. Frey approached the bartender, casually grabbing his attention before asking about someone named Wesker. Before the bartender could respond, a voice from behind cut in. A man seated at a table with a chessboard in front of him turned toward Frey, studying him with a curious gaze. Noticing the newcomer, the man smirked and remarked on his presence, immediately recognizing him as a traveler. Frey took the cue and sat down, mentioning he had heard about Wesker's chess skills and wanted to have some fun. Unfazed, Wesker leaned forward and asked how much he would bet. Frey hesitated momentarily before shrugging and offering to buy Wesker a drink instead. The crowd around them erupted into laughter at the unexpected response, the atmosphere growing livelier. Frey turned around, startled by a sudden presence behind him. A sharp gasp escaped him before he quickly composed himself. Wesker leaned back with a smirk, explaining that gambling wasn't just about making a living, it was about the thrill, the rush of uncertainty. Betting near pocket change held no excitement for him. At first, Frey had only intended to test the man, but after hearing that, he reconsidered. He reached into his pocket and placed his watch on the table with a decisive clink. He recalled the innkeeper's words about how luxurious the watch was, but it was the perfect wager for someone like Wesker, who sought excitement over wealth. Whether he could win or not, that was the gamble. Wesker's eyes widened in surprise as the watch landed on the table with a sharp clink. Around them, the crowd stirred, whispers spreading like wildfire. Some speculated it was stolen, while others were convinced Frey was part of the Yakuza. Tension thickened as murmurs turned into hushed concerns. If Wesker won, would a gang storm in to stir up trouble? Was this some blackmail scheme? Unease rippled through the spectators, but Wesker's expression slowly shifted from shock to intrigue. Frey held up the watch, trying to shake off any suspicion, but his face went pale as a memory of the Demon King flashed through his mind. This situation was getting worse by the second. Wesker's expression hardened, immediately assuming the worst. Meanwhile, the people around him started whispering if he backed down now, it would ruin his reputation. After a moment of hesitation, Wesker exhaled and leaned back, forcing a casual grin. Instead of taking the gamble seriously, playing it off casually, he announced a compromise, a bet over a drink instead. The two men beside him exchanged knowing looks. To them, it was apparent he was scared. Fia approached Frey, questioning his decision to make such a risky bet. Though aware of her concern, Frey decided to keep the details to himself. But trust him on this one. The game between Frey and Wesker began, and chess pieces clattering against the board filled the tense atmosphere. Wesker, amused, made a remark likening Frey's attitude to that of a gambling addict. Frey merely laughed, neither confirming nor denying it, as he focused on the match. Meanwhile, Fia reflected on Frey's words and turned to Reno, considering whether his reasoning was justified. She found it not entirely unreasonable. When Reno responded, his answer came just as Wesker made another remark, reinforcing that Frey was acting like a true gambler. Watching the exchange unfold, Fia smiled. Reno considered Frey's actions carefully, knowing that if Frey ever acted recklessly, it wouldn't be in front of his students. He was confident that Frey was being honest, though he might loosen up behind the scenes. He wasn't the type to be careless when it mattered. Frey, however, looked slightly irritated at the observation, feeling too much emphasis was being placed on that idea. As the chess game continued, Frey studied Wesker intently. This man was undeniably stronger than him in this game. The question lingered in his mind, was there a way to win back the keepsake through chess alone? No matter how he looked at it, the conclusion was the same. It was his loss. Fia watched Frey from behind, concern evident in her expression. She thought back to what Reno had said. Frey must have a reason for needing to win. She wanted to help ease his burden, but doubt crept into her mind. Was someone like her capable of making a difference? She recalled Frey's words from before. He had been focused on returning them safely, putting his role as a teacher on hold. But he had also made it clear that if she wanted to move forward, he would always be there to give her a push. With renewed determination, Fia made up her mind. Stepping forward, she resolved to take on the challenge herself. Frey had lost, but she was ready to fight in his place. Wesker raised an eyebrow at the bold declaration, amused by the sudden challenge. He studied Fia briefly, noting the shock on her face before she reaffirmed her resolve. He found her confidence intriguing. Had she just watched the last match and decided she could beat him? If so, it was a pretty daring assumption. Still, judging by the flow of conversation, he felt sure he was stronger than her previous opponent. With a smirk, he decided to entertain the challenge. This could be interesting. Reno glanced at Fia, concern evident on her face. She leaned toward Frey, lowering her voice as she questioned him. Fia had never mentioned knowing how to play chess, let alone shown any skill. Was this a good idea? Frey, however, didn't seem worried. With a relaxed expression, he gestured for Reno to wait and see. Wesker leaned forward, eyeing Fia with amusement as he asked what she planned to bet. Caught off guard, she hesitated, unsure of what to offer. Before she could respond, Frey stepped in, shifting the conversation. He brought up something Wesker had won the previous day, something taken from a newcomer. Recognizing what Frey meant, Wesker casually pulled out a small piece of jewelry and smirked, confirming it as the item in question. He then turned the tables, demanding a suitable bet in return. Without hesitation, Frey produced his pocket watch. Wesker immediately reacted, reminding him that he had already refused that as a stake. Frey, only then realizing the issue with his offer, paused. Fia rustled through her belongings as the moment grew tense and spoke up. If all that mattered was matching the value, she had something just as good. With quiet confidence, she revealed a stone. Frey's eyes widened in shock, recognizing it instantly. But before he could object, Wesker had already examined the stone and grinned. It was perfect. With that, the match was officially set. The pieces were arranged. The game began. The sound of clattering chess pieces filled the room. Wesker observed Fia's movements. At first, her handling of the pieces was clumsy, which made him wary. But as the game unfolded, he recognized her opening following the Sicilian Najdorf sequence. That alone meant she wasn't a beginner, and he felt slightly relieved. The match continued, pieces clattering against the board. With each move, Wesker's confidence wavered. She wasn't just competent, she was expertly dismantling his strategy. Every attempt he made to go on the offensive was met with precise counters, effortlessly redirecting his attacks. Then, as he watched her next move, something clicked. It wasn't just defense. She was turning his momentum against him, breaking through his formations piece by piece. Shock washed over him. She wasn't just deflecting, she was devouring him. Reno watched the match unfold, glancing at Wesker's increasingly tense expression. She leaned toward Frey and whispered, noting that while she didn't understand chess, it seemed like Wesker was starting to panic. Frey observed the board, his eyes following each of Fia's moves. She wasn't just holding her ground, but counterattacking with full force. He couldn't help but be impressed. To think she had this level of skill. Reno, still trying to process what was happening, asked if Frey had known about Fia's abilities beforehand. But Frey shook his head. This was Fia's first ever chess match. The first time she had even watched a game was just 2 days ago. This was only her second time playing. The weight of that revelation hit Wesker like a hammer. His chair scraped against the floor as he suddenly stood up, slamming a hand onto the table. Bang! Shock twisted his expression. This wasn't possible. Absolutely no one could play like this with so little experience. Fia blushed, looking a bit shy as she tried to explain herself. She watched a match 2 days ago and picked up the rules well. Then, just yesterday, she had her teacher review the finer details so she could play adequately now. Still, she thought Frey was overreacting a little. Wesker, however, wasn't buying it. His thoughts raced. This wasn't just about knowing the rules. This level of play was beyond any beginner. Were they trying to throw him off with a bluff? The game continued, each move clattering against the board. Wesker's mind struggled to keep up. Something didn't add up. Their moves had that raw, unpolished feel of a beginner, yet their strategy was airtight. There was no reason to pretend to be an amateur if they were this strong. But if they weren't pretending, was she seriously just a beginner? Reno observed the match with growing curiosity, glancing at Frey. Even if he hadn't known the full extent of Fia's abilities, he must have suspected she was strong. And indeed, he had. 2 days prior, after Frey had defeated the innkeeper in chess, Fia had made an odd remark. She had called the innkeeper a kind person. Frey hadn't thought much of it at the time, but he had asked her what she meant the following day. Fia had explained that the chess match had been a wager to let them stay at the inn for free since they had nowhere else to go. But to her, the wager had been an excuse. The innkeeper wanted to help them, but deliberately lost the match to give them a place to stay. That revelation had caught Frey off guard. The innkeeper had intentionally lost. Shortly after that conversation, Fia had asked him basic questions about the names of chess pieces and how to count the squares on the board. At the time, it had seemed like mere curiosity. But now, as he recalled what had happened next, Frey realized it had been something more. Despite only learning about chess recently, Fia had effortlessly recounted the opening sequence of the match from the initial knight move to f3, followed by d4, e4, c3, and so on. She had even detailed the precise moment when the innkeeper had lost his advantage. Until his 39th move, the innkeeper had held a slight upper hand, but his decision to move his knight to e3 had shifted the entire flow of the game. Frey acknowledged this was the turning point, but then Fia went further. She had pointed out that if the innkeeper had played his rook to a 4 instead of moving his knight, he would have secured an undeniable victory, just like that. Frey had been stunned. Fia had not even known the proper names of the chess pieces 2 days ago. Usually, it would be impossible for a beginner to analyze a game so precisely to determine who had the advantage, recognize a crucial mistake, and even pinpoint the single best move to win. Even Frey himself hadn't realized it during the match. And even after it was explained to him, it had taken him a moment to fully grasp the significance of what she had said. Frey felt something unfamiliar for the first time toward one of his students. It wasn't curiosity. It wasn't admiration. It wasn't even the tension he had felt when he first discovered that his students were demons or when he learned they were the daughters of the Demon King. It wasn't even the shock he had experienced when Femme unleashed a spell so powerful that it altered the very terrain. Even then, he had sensed danger, but not this. No, this was different. Frey felt fear toward one of his students for the first time. Meanwhile, Fia smiled as she casually explained how the innkeeper had let him win on purpose. Ultimately, the question remained, had the innkeeper let them win on purpose? Frey had tried to confirm it, but the truth was ambiguous. Regardless, the innkeeper admitted that he had always intended to let them stay. However, his reaction was far from composed. Frustrated, he ranted that if he had won, he would have made them cough up every coin they had. And for anything they couldn't pay, he would have forced them to do chores or whatever else was necessary to make a difference. According to him, letting someone stay for free on purpose was ridiculous. Yet, despite his protests, one fact became clear: he hadn't realized the best move. Reno, still struggling to process everything, remarked on how unbelievable it was that the young lady had managed such a feat. Frey, watching Fia, could only nod. Looking back, there had been signs all along. At the castle, San impatiently asked Rose about the status of the teleportation magic tool, eager to have it fixed so they could help Fia and the others. Rose explained that it only needed a few final adjustments. Without hesitation, San urged her to finish it immediately so they could leave. Before she could push further, Asuna placed a firm hand on her shoulder, stopping her. San turned to protest, but Asuna reminded her that she wanted to help Darling and the others, but Rose had been working tirelessly without rest. If they rushed and another accident happened, things would only worsen. Understanding the situation, Asuna instructed Rose to take a short break before completing the adjustments. Rose agreed, though exhaustion was evident in her posture. San hesitated momentarily before finally admitting the real reason for her urgency. She was worried about Fia, who seemed unwell. Frey noticed Reno's shock when he pointed out Fia's difficulty with walking. Reno immediately questioned whether it could be an illness, but Frey clarified, reminding him that Fia often stumbled. That was what he meant. For a moment, Frey also considered the possibility of an illness, but Fia's explanation painted a different picture. Walking, she reasoned, was essentially just controlled falling, lifting a foot, losing balance, using that momentum to move forward, landing, and regaining balance. The entire body worked in harmony: feet, arms, neck, shoulders, and waist, each movement calculated to maintain equilibrium. But if those calculations became too complex, the simple act of walking could result in constant stumbling. Frey turned back to Reno, making sure he understood. Fia didn't just move naturally as others did. Every action, from walking to picking up small objects, resulted from intricate calculations. It was as if she were some high-level computational device, like the legendary machines from the Tale of Irterra, a computer. Reno, looking a bit lost, admitted he didn't quite grasp the comparison. Having never read that particular book, Frey's expression darkened as he explained further. Fia's mind operated on a level far beyond that of humans and demons. This wasn't just an unusual talent, it was something extraordinary. Reno, still skeptical, pointed out that this ability didn't necessarily matter when deciding the successor to the Demon Lord. It was rare, sure, but not directly relevant. Frey disagreed. It would be invaluable for a ruler if such strategic insight could be applied to governance or policy making. But more than that, Wesker stood up abruptly, his expression a mix of confusion and fear. Frey rushed over to assess the situation, quickly realizing the state of the board. Wesker's white forces had been nearly annihilated. In truth, they had held out impressively well until now, but even so, Wesker acknowledged the inevitable. It was his loss. Fia, wide-eyed, could hardly process it. Her victory? Hers? She had always felt helpless, unable to do anything, and yet Frey, watching her reaction, understood. Even if Fia's talent wasn't suited for the test, even if it had no practical use, what mattered most was that she had found something of her own. That, above all else, was important. Turning to her, he reassured her. That's what truly mattered. Fia's face lit up with a genuine smile for the first time during a match. At the inn, Frey sat with a sense of relief, grateful for the help he had received. With his recent success in securing funds, he offered payment for the lodging and meals. However, holding firm to his pride, the innkeeper refused the money, insisting that he had willingly accepted the bet and lost, making it unacceptable to take payment now. Recognizing the innkeeper's unwavering stance, Frey proposed another wager to allow the older man to maintain his dignity. If the innkeeper won the chess match, the stay would remain free, but he would have to accept the money if he lost. Suspicious of the offer, the innkeeper considered the possibility that Frey was suggesting a match to ensure he would take the money without feeling guilty. Unwilling to be underestimated, he declared that he would win no matter what and ensure Frey's stay remained unpaid. Confident in their evenly matched skills, he was determined to claim victory this time. But Frey had no intention of playing himself. Instead, he turned to Fia, signaling that she would be the one to take on the challenge. With Reno by her side, cheering her on, the stage was set for another match with much more at stake than just money. Meanwhile, in the castle, everyone gathered anxiously around the teleportation door, waiting for it to activate. As the door finally opened, Fia stepped through, her eyes brimming with tears as she looked at the familiar faces before her. Isuna immediately scanned the group, her expression shifting into concern. Frey was missing. She turned to Rose for an answer, but Rose calmly explained that Frey had something left to take care of in the human world. She reassured them that she would return to bring him back in an hour. Back in the human world, Frey met with Margaret. Without hesitation, he tossed her the piece of jewelry Fia had won from Wesker during their match. Margaret caught it, her eyes softening as she smiled in gratitude. Frey, however, remained serious. He questioned the circumstances surrounding her loss, pointing out that Wesker had supposedly tricked her into a wager and taken the jewelry. But was that the case? Margaret's expression darkened as she processed his words. She demanded to know what he meant. Frey, unfazed, explained that after the match, he had asked Wesker directly how he had come to possess the item. Wesker recalled the events leading up to the chess match. Wesker sat at a table, casually playing cards, when a sudden loud bang echoed through the shop, silencing the room. The crowd erupted in startled shouts, confusion spreading as heads turned toward the source of the disturbance. Before anyone could make sense of the situation, Margaret stormed in with an imposing presence. Without hesitation, she grabbed Wesker by the neck, her expression sharp with irritation. The chaotic atmosphere didn't sit well with her, and she seemed unimpressed by the lack of swift answers. Her gaze swept the room before settling on Wesker. Determining him to be the strongest chess player there, she handed him a piece of jewelry with a knowing smirk. Her instructions were clear: travelers would arrive the next day, and when one of them sought him out, he was to engage them in a high-stakes chess match. The usual betting rules applied, but he was expected to fight with everything he had. The travelers had been forced into the match, and he was strictly forbidden from speaking about it until he lost. The weight of her presence made it clear this was not a request, but an order. Frey explained everything to Margaret, recounting the events with a knowing look. The details of Wesker's story didn't add up, and other guests had shared the same version of events, further casting doubt on the claim. Margaret initially dismissed it, insisting that if multiple people were saying the same thing, they were likely all in on it together. Frey sighed, reflecting on the inconsistencies that had been there from the start. Visiting the tavern only confirmed those suspicions. These weren't the kind of people who would deceive someone by using children as pawns. Despite the doubts, Frey had still chosen to help, which made Margaret pause. If the truth was as clear as Frey claimed, then the real question remained: why had she orchestrated the situation in the first place? A shadow crossed her expression as she considered the implications. Frey gestured toward the object in question, highlighting the key detail. Wesker had placed it as his wager, and in response, Fia had offered something of her own. With both sides agreeing to the terms, the bet had been sealed. The implication was clear. Wesker had determined that Fia's belongings and Margaret's held the same value. Margaret hesitated, piecing together the meaning behind the comparison. Were both items genuinely identical? Then did they possess the same jewel? But Frey's expression remained firm. That wasn't a jewel at all. In the castle, San expressed relief at their safe return, while Fia nodded, acknowledging more than just their arrival, everything had gone smoothly. She opened her pendant with a small pop, revealing a stone inside. Without hesitation, she let it roll into her hand and bit into it. The stone wasn't just any ordinary gem. It was refined, crystallized blood specifically made as a portable source for vampires. Margaret's expression darkened, her gaze sharp with realization. What did that imply about her nature if she possessed the same kind of stone? The thought was unsettling. Meanwhile, Frey calmly pieced everything together. The answer to Margaret's earlier question now became apparent. He had listened to her story, even with doubts, because there had been a possibility it was true. Beyond that, after recognizing Fia's remarkable intelligence and talent in chess, her request piqued his curiosity. But looking back, it all seemed too convenient, almost as if Margaret had intentionally guided events to take advantage of Fia's abilities. If he considered her an ordinary person and a vampire capable of executing such a calculated plan, then her true identity became clear. Margaret bit down on the stone with a quiet crunch. The truth settled in. She was no ordinary woman, the Demon King's wife and Fia's mother, the vampire Noin-sama. Noin acknowledged the conclusion with a smirk, admitting that Frey had reached the correct answer. Still, she couldn't help but comment on his roundabout approach. There had been no need for such a lengthy conversation to get to this point. Frey, unfazed, offered a polite apology, explaining that it was simply his nature to lay out the thought process when confirming something. He found satisfaction in piecing things together step by step. With her identity now exposed, Noin no longer wanted to maintain her disguise. She closed her eyes for a brief moment before releasing the transformation magic. With a sudden whoosh, her form shifted, the illusion fading away to reveal her true self. As Frey observed the transformation, his earlier suspicions clicked into place. From the moment he first met Noin, something had felt off. There had been a faint trace of magic surrounding her, subtle but undeniable. He couldn't identify its nature at the time, but the sensation lingered in his mind. It wasn't until he reunited with Fia and the others that he realized. The magical presence he had sensed before was the same as the one surrounding them. It was transformation magic. In other words, Noin's childlike appearance was a temporary form, an illusion created by magic. Her proper form was something else entirely. As Noin completed her transformation, Frey watched in anticipation, expecting a dramatic change. Instead, she remained the same height, with only her hair color, ears, and fangs altered. The realization left him momentarily speechless. She casually pointed at her newly visible fangs to emphasize the transformation. Frey couldn't help but wonder if vampires had conditions that triggered further physical changes, perhaps drinking blood or the influence of a full moon. Noin dismissed the idea outright. Frey drifted to the Demon King, finding the situation strangely amusing. But before he could thoroughly entertain the thought, Noin addressed it directly, calling it disrespectful to both her and her husband. She even mentioned that she was older than him, adding to the mystery surrounding her. Shifting gears, Frey brought up Fia's talent, curious if Noin had noticed it. She confirmed she had, though even she wasn't entirely sure how. Noin recalled her husband's instructions not to interfere with the children. However, she felt compelled to act when she learned that Achel had gone to meet them. It became clear that Noin had intended to lend a hand, though only in a way that both her husband and daughter would eventually notice. She had been waiting for the right moment, but before she could act, the teleportation accident occurred. Recognizing the situation, she quickly analyzed the group's displacement and rushed to the town without hesitation. Frey couldn't help but admire her devotion to her daughter, finding it impressive and worthy of respect. Noin clarified that she had only been observing the situation at the tavern, subtly arranging events rather than directly interfering. She acknowledged that Fia had been able to act thanks to Frey's guidance. Frey, however, believed that Fia had the potential to defeat Wesker, though his initial intention had only been to let her watch and learn. Even so, he had given her a slight push forward, sensing that deep down, she wanted to take that step herself. Ultimately, the fact that she had done so was entirely Fia's accomplishment. As their conversation ended, Frey mentioned that the next time he would see Noin would be during the exam. Noin reminded him that there wasn't much time left, urging him to carefully decide what to teach and evaluate without letting his guard down. With a smile, she encouraged him to do his best, and Frey, feeling more confident after the recent events, assured her that he had plenty of ideas for guiding Fia. He was determined to leave nothing to chance. Watching him, Noin reflected on his role as her daughter's teacher. However, as she considered his words about determining the best teaching methods, she realized he was focused only on Fia. What she had been referring to, though, was someone else entirely, the eldest daughter, Anna. Still, she knew that interfering any further might be overstepping. With that thought, she stepped back, letting events unfold as they would. Time passed, and soon, the day of the exam arrived. Frey entered the grand building with his students, accompanied by Rose and Reno. The structure was breathtaking, and its pristine design is a testament to its importance. This was when the sisters finally got to prove their true strength. Rose mentioned that the building had been constructed specifically for this occasion, which left Frey momentarily stunned. The idea of erecting an entire facility just for a single event was excessive, but then again, it was entirely fitting for the Demon King's daughters. The sheer size of the audience made it clear this was no ordinary exam. The anticipation in the air was palpable. Even Frey had dressed more formally than usual, knowing how significant this day was for his students. As Frey adjusted his outfit, he reflected on how long it had been since he last wore it back in his academy teaching days. His thoughts drifted to the academy, and he imagined its usual yearly routines. Suddenly, he felt weightless. Realization struck he was floating. Confused, he turned his head and saw a towering woman holding him effortlessly. Her piercing gaze sized him up before acknowledging him. Before he could react, a familiar voice rang out. San rushed forward, calling out to the woman. At her voice, the woman immediately released Frey and turned to her daughter. Steadying himself, Frey pieced it together. If this woman was San's mother, she could only be one person, the Demon King's wife, the dark elf Shisama. Thea hesitated momentarily, acknowledging that it had been a while, but she reminded herself that their father had strictly forbidden them from meeting. Just then, a presence by the door caught her attention. The figure stepped forward, her expression calm yet resolute. She stated that, unlike before, their father had given her permission to visit this time. As soon as eyes widened in recognition, calling out, she rushed forward, addressing the woman with reverence. Echel-sama. As soon as thoughts raced, had the Demon King himself arranged this? If so, could it be that seeing their mother right before the exam was another test? It was a challenge to see if they could remain focused despite the emotional weight of the reunion. Sen clenched her fists, determination flashing in her eyes. Rather than being shaken, she felt even more motivated. Anna nodded in agreement, her resolve unwavering. Their focus wouldn't waver just because of this moment. A voice interrupted, warm yet teasing. If they were unfazed, it would be for her to see Anna. Anna turned, her eyes widening. Standing before her was a towering figure with an unmistakable presence. Her mother. With a soft smile, the woman assured Anna of her support. It had been a long time, yet Anna still refused to call her Mom. A gentle reprimand followed. Manners were important, even between parents and children. Frey observed quietly, taking in the woman's imposing figure. This was Anna's mother, the Dragonskin says. Unlike many of her kind, her appearance leaned far closer to that of a true dragon than most, her presence exuding power and grace. Frey stood still, scanning the gathering. Only one was missing, Fem's mother. Before he could finish his thought, the girl beside him suddenly dashed forward. Fem's eyes lit up as she called out, her voice filled with warmth. Her mother had arrived. Frey was taken aback. His mind raced to process what he was seeing. Rose, standing beside him, explained in a hushed voice. Tai-sama was a wraith, a being whose existence straddled both the physical and spirit realms. It was said that half of her body resided in the spirit world, making her one of the rarest among her kind. Texts described wraiths as ethereal, but Tai's manifestation was even more unusual. Parts of her ceased to exist in the material world. What couldn't be seen couldn't be touched. Frey composed himself, offering a polite apology for his momentary surprise. Now, all 5 of the Demon King's wives stood before him. Frey considered the contrast. They were as diverse as one could imagine, ranging from humanoid to genuinely otherworldly. Yet, despite his human-like appearance, Hazar, the Demon King, had chosen them all without regard for similarity. This quality was perhaps essential for a ruler among demons, whose forms varied far more than humans. Reno pointed ahead, her expression calm yet firm, emphasizing one final thought: mind and heart in harmony. Frey sighed, shaking his head. That man honestly had no restraint. The Colosseum roared with excitement as the crowd cheered in anticipation. Seated at the highest vantage point, the 5 mothers and the Demon King overlooked the grand arena, their presence commanding attention. With a subtle gesture, the Demon King raised his hand, signaling for silence. The noise gradually subsided as all eyes turned toward him. Clearing his throat, he addressed the audience, his voice resonating throughout the Colosseum. This event was meant to showcase the progress of his daughter's training, a crucial step in his process of selecting a successor. However, he urged everyone to view it as a progress check and enjoy the spectacle ahead. Frey pondered the Demon King's words, so this was merely a progress check. That made sense. The sisters might still receive further training under an assigned tutor, depending on the results. However, as the Demon King continued, his statement sent a wave of tension through the arena. Those who showed no promise here would not get another chance. A heavy silence followed. The five sisters stood stiff, their expressions turning serious, while Frey, standing beside them, felt a bead of sweat roll down his temple. The weight of the test had just escalated, and the pressure was undeniable. The crowd stirred with unease as the Demon King's words settled over them. A pig-headed demon tensed. Was he willing to abandon his daughters if they failed? Beside him, a wolf-headed demon watched the five sisters, sensing the crushing pressure they faced. Murmurs spread. Their teacher was a mere human. Could he have genuinely prepared them? Among powerful demons, the idea seemed doubtful. As Frey adjusted his outfit, a sense of nostalgia washed over him. The formal attire, the tension in the air, it all reminded him of his academy days. From his seat, the Demon King's voice echoed across the Colosseum, announcing the start of the exam. Each test had been tailored to the individual, and the first to step forward was Fen. She moved cautiously, nerves evident in her posture as she approached the stage. Watching her, Frey's thoughts drifted. It was exam season at the academy as well. The Lux Martial Arts Tournament, the rigorous selection exam for the academy's representatives, was likely underway. A sudden thought crossed his mind. Was Lily also facing a critical test now? Frey was lost in thought, caught up in memories of his past job until a familiar presence beside him brought him back to the moment. Before he could dwell on it, the four sisters silently reminded him to focus on the present. Shaking off his thoughts, he let out a small smile. They were right, today wasn't about the past. His eyes landed on Femme as she hesitated on the stage, nerves evident in her stance. Without thinking, he called out to her, offering a reassuring thumbs up. Femme turned, uncertainty flickering in her expression. But as she saw the silent encouragement, her posture shifted. The nervous energy faded, replaced by quiet determination. The Demon King's voice echoed through the Colosseum as he revealed Femme's challenge. High above, a shimmering magical barrier stretched across the sky, its surface pulsing with energy. Crafted by 20 elite barrier mages from the demon world, it stood a formidable test of power and skill. Femme's task was simple in theory: break through it using the magic she had learned. Asuna cheered. But now wasn't the time. His role here was clear: to support his students. Pushing aside all other thoughts, he refocused on Femme, ready to guide her through the challenge ahead. On the same day as the Demon Princess's exams, a tournament occurred at Lux Hero Academy's third training ground. The tension in the air was palpable as the match began. The girl with black hair lunged forward, aiming a strike at her opponent, the girl with white hair. Whispers spread rapidly. Did this mean a commoner would represent them? As the final announcement was made, the official's voice rang through the training ground, declaring Lily Hashlet, the Academy's representative for the Lux Martial Arts Tournament. Standing at the center of it all, Lily's thoughts drifted elsewhere, to the one who had trained her, Sensei Frey. Meanwhile, in the Demon Princess's exam venue, the Demon King watched Breaking the barrier itself was never the point, though. If she could even damage it, that would be impressive at least. That had been the plan. But to his surprise, Femme completely obliterated the barrier. The Demon King couldn't hide his shock, realizing she was far more potent than the reports suggested. Her growth was terrifying. With the exam progressing, the Demon King announced the next challenger, San, the second daughter. With unwavering confidence, she stepped forward, her stance poised for the challenge ahead. Thank you for watching, guys. I hope you love this manga. Have a good day.